Chapter 658. His Majesty was far away in Chang'an. If he wanted to ask for instructions, it would take a long time to go back and forth, and the black horse carriage was already at the foot of the city. General Han Qing's words sounded like irresponsible nonsense. However, no one in the room showed such emotions. They just looked a little surprised. The Tang military had set up 3 talisman teleportation arrays on the border. They could transmit short pieces of information through the air. One of them was set up in Helan City and could directly connect to the Imperial Palace in Chang'an. Teleportation formations could only transmit very little information, and the amount of resources required to activate them was unimaginable. This was especially true for the one in Helan City. Because the communication distance was too great, the cost was even greater. According to the designer's calculations, using it once would require 10 years' worth of supplies for Helan City. According to the military regulations of the Tang Empire, the teleportation array could only be activated in dangerous times, such as when the Golden Tribe was invading, or when the Left King's palace was trying to break through from the eastern wilderness to threaten the Tang Empire. Since a sage from the Academy had set up this teleportation array, the teleportation array in Helan City had only been activated twice in the past hundreds of years. However, it was activated again today because of a lonely horse carriage. It was quiet in the city tower. Other than the sizzling sound of the chi of heaven and earth condensing on the talisman array, no other sound could be heard. General Han Qing and the senior officers stared at the clean surface of the talisman array in silence. They did not know what kind of reply they would see later, and they all became very nervous. After an unknown period of time, a pale yellow light flashed, and a very small piece of paper appeared on the ground. When the Imperial Palace replied, they must have considered the resources needed to use the teleportation array and tried to reduce the weight as much as possible. General Han Qing walked forward and picked up the paper. He saluted with a serious expression and then showed it to everyone. There was no seal on the small paper, and there were 3 clear words written on it. The handwriting was not sloppy and was very serious, but it could not be considered outstanding. The generals could tell at a glance that it was the handwriting of His Majesty. Let him go. After a moment of silence in the city tower, the deputy who strongly suggested to attack earlier frowned and said, "There is no seal, and there is no seal from the military ministry. This paper has no effect." Han Qing glanced at this person and said in a slightly cold voice, "According to the military rules of Helan City, the paper passed by the formation comes from the Imperial Palace. Since it is written by His Majesty himself, it is equivalent to an imperial edict." The deputy general was a little nervous, but he still insisted on his opinion. He said in a low voice, "Ninkei is a grand cultivator in the knowing destiny state. We can deal with him outside the city, but if we let him in, how many of us will die to suppress him? If something happens to Helan City, who will bear the responsibility?" General Han Qing coldly reprimanded, "The soldiers of our great Tang have the duty to obey military orders. His Majesty's imperial edict is the highest military order. If His Majesty says it's possible, then it's possible. As for the responsibility, it's the responsibility of all the people of the empire." The formation was activated, and a huge wooden plate began to rotate. The ropes rubbed against the tung oil, emitting a subtle sound. The heavy, high, and narrow city gates slowly opened. The black horse carriage drove into Helan City, following the narrow riding path at the bottom of the mountain, heading east. There were steep cliffs on both sides of the road, and dozens of sturdy mountain forts were built between the cliffs. In each fort, there was a small camp. No one knew how many supplies and weapons were stored in them, making people feel fearful just by looking at them. Between Helan City and the cliffs, countless hardwood bows had been pulled taut. Dozens of ballistae kept slowly adjusting their angles, aiming at the black horse carriage. Under the command of the officer, more than 10 catapults tightened their springs, ensuring that once an attack was launched, those huge rocks would be thrown at the same time, burying the horse carriage. If anyone dares to ignore the military order and move first, his head will be chopped off. General Han Qing said with a serious expression. He ordered the deputy general to bring his bodyguards to watch the most powerful ballistae and catapults. Then, under the protection of the shield soldiers, he went to the eastern city wall and looked at the black horse carriage with narrowed eyes. After a while, the deputy general hurried back and whispered a few words into his ear. Han Qing's face suddenly became a little ugly. He did not expect that someone would actually dare to make a move. "Where is he?" General Han Qing asked coldly. The deputy general replied in a low voice, "Deputy General Xiao and his bodyguard have been disarmed and locked up. Chop off his head." General Han Qing said expressionlessly. The deputy general's expression changed slightly. He thought that although military orders were like a mountain and could not be taken lightly, it was understandable that Deputy General Xiao wanted to kill the daughter of Yama. Moreover, he was a trusted aide of the Empress. General Han Qing knew what he was thinking and said with a frosty expression, "I don't care if he is the Empress's man or the princess's man. Any soldier who dares to question or oppose His Majesty's order does not have the right to continue living. And he is very clear that if this horse carriage is attacked, many people in Heilin City will die today." Thousands of Tang soldiers stood on the walls of Heilin City, in the fortifications on the cliffs, and behind the barracks and arrow mounds on the slopes. They looked at the black horse carriage silently and with complicated expressions, as if they were sending it off. The deputy general once again returned to General Han Qing's side. The saber at his waist gave off a faint smell of blood. He followed the general's gaze and looked at the black horse carriage. His mood also became very complicated. From an ordinary soldier in the city of Wei to his current position, how many people have there been since the founding of the Tang Empire? All these years, who in the Northern Army is not proud of him? Who in a northern military camp does not treat him as a goal and an idol to strive for? General Han Qing looked at the black horse carriage and was very emotional. The deputy general sighed and said, "It's a pity that a beauty is a source of trouble. Heroes will eventually fall for the charms of a beauty. Ning Ke could not have achieved what he has today without the nurturing of His Majesty and the Academy. But in the end, he did not care about the safety of the Tang Empire and the world, and insisted on doing things his own way. He is really heartless and a bastard to the extreme." At this moment, a gust of wind blew in the Heilin Mountains, causing the window of the black horse carriage to make a whistling sound. The curtain flew up and revealed a girl's face. The girl's face was slightly pale, and she looked ordinary. Her short hair was blown into a mess by the wind, and she looked like a ball of wild grass. General Han Qing looked at her and said, "How is this a beauty? How can she be considered a beauty?" The deputy general also saw the girl's face and was a little surprised. After a moment of silence, he said, "It seems that Ning Ke is actually a person who values friendship and righteousness. Although he chose the wrong person, he is still worthy of admiration." General Han Qing said, "To be able to make His Majesty look at her differently, she is naturally extraordinary." As soon as they left the defensive area of the Heilin City, Ning Ke let the big black horse speed up. They broke through the snow and crushed the ice along the way, stepping on the cold ground and following the narrow Heilin Mountains, running wildly towards the east. The snowy peaks high up in the canyon did not move fast in their field of vision, and the nearby cliffs had already turned into a rapidly receding gray line. One could imagine how shocking the speed of the black horse carriage was now. Sang Sang was a little surprised and did not understand why they suddenly wanted to speed up. Ning Ke saw her expression but did not answer. He silently and focused on driving the horse carriage, pushing the speed to the maximum. Ning Ke needed speed now. Starting from Shubi Lake, the black horse carriage entered the traditional sphere of influence of the Tang Empire. The cultivators and powerhouses of the two sects of Buddhism and Taoism could not chase and kill them like they did before because of various kinds of fear. But no one would give up. God knew how many forces had been watching them and guessing the route of the black horse carriage. The large dark clouds in the sky and the dozens of black crows were constantly reporting their whereabouts to the human world. When the black horse carriage came to Heilin City, many people might have already guessed where they were going. Out of the Helan Mountains, they would enter the eastern wilderness and leave the sphere of influence of the Tang Empire. There were countless forces in the wilderness, including the Left King's Palace, the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army, the Desolate Man's Tribe, and many powerhouses. Ning Ke did not know who would be waiting for him in the wilderness after passing through this mountain range. Since that was the case, no matter how fast the black horse carriage traveled, it seemed to be meaningless. Then why did he choose this? The dark clouds fell on the silver mask, making it look even darker. Long Qing looked at the thick, dark clouds in the sky and covering the earth from the west. The corner of his mouth that was exposed outside, the mask slowly rose. He said, "The ending of your story, of course, should be written by me." Then he lowered his head and continued writing. The soft pen tip kept moving on the letter paper. He drew a diagram, which seemed to be the attack and defense diagram of a large city gate. Then he wrote a few simple lines. He sealed the letter with lacquer and handed it to a former commander of the cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace. He said calmly, "When you arrive at Capital Chung, hand this letter to him personally and tell him that if an opportunity arises, we must seize it." The depraved commander accepted the order, jumped on his horse, and galloped towards the south. As a trusted follower of Prince Long Qing, he only knew this secret recently. Thinking of the discussions in the human world in the past, he could not help but feel a little cold. His respect for Prince Long Qing increased. Prince Long Qing looked at the horse riding away and was silent for a long time. He found that he had become unfamiliar with his homeland and could not help but shake his head. His journey was in the realm of light and darkness. How could it be in the mortal world? He walked slowly to the edge of the cliff and looked at the exit of the mountain, which was about 100 feet wide. His expression gradually calmed down. Behind him, there were more than 10 powerhouses at the peak of the see-through state and 2 ordinary-looking old men in ordinary clothes. On the wilderness, not far away, there were also 3,000 cavalrymen of the Left King's Palace. Using so many people to write the ending of the story for the Black Horse Carriage, Prince Long Qing felt that he had already shown enough respect to the 2 people in the horse carriage. The dark clouds in the sky had passed over the towering snow-capped peak and went deep into the center of the wilderness. The sound of hoofbeats was hurried. The black horse carriage under the clouds finally drove out of the Helan Mountain Gap and came to the wilderness. It came to a slow stop in front of Long Qing. Long Qing sat on the horse and looked at the black horse carriage at the foot of the hill. He reached out and took off the silver mask on his face, revealing his burned cheeks. He smiled slightly and looked particularly ferocious. Also, try to finish the next chapter before 1 o'clock. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 659. A Black Carriage. Thousands of elite cavalries of the Left King's Palace, Prince Long Qing, and a dozen fallen commanders at the peak of the see-through state. The disparity in power between the 2 sides was so great that it could not even be called a confrontation. Ning Ke's voice came from the black carriage. "I didn't expect you to be the first one to come." Long Qing replied, "I am now the master of this wilderness. You should be able to guess." Ning Ke said, "Don't you understand that the Divine Hall is just using you as a dog? It's better to be Hao Ian's dog than a ghost in the underworld." Long Qing paused for a moment and continued, "Of course, I can accept being Yama's dog if I have to." Ning Ke said, "You are still so ambitious. It seems that you are not here to kill us. Then why do you have to make such a big scene? When I believed in Hao Ian and was willing to dedicate my life and soul to the light, she was the daughter of light. When I suffered the most painful experience in the world and decided to sacrifice my life and soul to the dark night, she became the daughter of Yama. Don't you think it's interesting?" Long Qing hid in the cliff and looked down. He said, "When I was drinking in Chang'an, I lost to Miss Sang Sang. This might be the proof of fate, so I will not kill her." Then he laughed heartily and said, "But I will kill you, because I also want to try to be the protector of the daughter of Yama. So if the dark night really comes, I can get some benefits from it. If not, I will naturally hand her over to Hao Ian." Ning Ke lifted the curtain of the carriage and looked somewhere in the cliff. He heard the laughter, but did not see Long Qing. He could not help but sneer, thinking that this guy was becoming more and more cautious. He said to the cliff, "Not everyone is qualified and strong enough to swing between the light and the dark. There are very few people who can be swayed between the light and the dark. If you continue like this, you will die miserably." Long Qing's calm and confident voice came from the cliff. "In between black and white is gray. This color is the most moderate and the safest." Ning Ke did not want to discuss metaphysical and philosophical issues with this person, even the simplest debate. He said directly, "Since you want to kill me, why don't you come out? What are you afraid of?" Long Qing said, "You are about to die. Why should I come out?" Ning Ke said, "If I die, she can't live either." Long Qing said, "I know you are cold-blooded, but I didn't expect you to be so cold-blooded to her." Ning Ke said, "I just know that if I die, she won't want to live." Long Qing's voice disappeared for a moment and then sounded again. He seemed a little emotional. "When did you become so narcissistic? Is this the temperament of the academy?" "I'm not you. I'm never narcissistic. I'm just confident." Ning Ke looked at the cliff and said, "If you weren't so narcissistic, you wouldn't have said so much nonsense. I'm confident that if you dare to appear in front of me, I can shoot you to death." Long Qing said, "I have now entered the upper state of knowing destiny, and my cultivation is far above yours. Not to say that it is difficult to find an opponent, but it is easy for me to kill you. Where do you get the confidence to kill me?" Ning Ke said, "When I was in the see-through state, I could shoot you to death in the Red Lotus Temple. Now that I have also entered the knowing destiny state, even the bald donkeys in the Xiankong Temple don't dare to take my arrows. Do you want to have a try?" Long Qing's calm voice echoed between the cliffs. "No matter how sharp-tongued and sarcastic I am, it is meaningless. I'm not saying these words to you to make you happy before you die. I just want the thousands of arrows to confirm your position. Do you regret talking with me?" Just as he was speaking, a dense buzzing sound suddenly rang out from the wasteland outside the eastern entrance of the Helan Mountains. It sounded like countless locusts flapping their wings and flying in the air. It was an extremely terrifying sight. Thousands of arrows shot into the gray clouds and then fell down in an arc, like a rainstorm falling on the black horse carriage in the valley. The shrill whistling of the arrows affected each other, layer upon layer, and sounded like thunder. People like Ning Ke and Long Qing would never say meaningless words before battle. If they did, it must be a part of the battle, or to suppress the opponent's morale, to do psychological warfare, or to buy time for some preparation. During this conversation, Prince Long Qing informed the thousands of cavalrymen in the wilderness of the black horse carriage's exact location, thus forming the first terrifying volley of arrows. Ning Ke, on the other hand, not only was simply stalling for time, he also untied the big black horse's bridle. The dense whistling of the arrows broke through the air, like a rainstorm covering the sky and clouds. Ning Ke opened the front door of the horse carriage, and the big black horse turned around at lightning speed. Its front hooves were in the air, and its hind hooves kicked the ground, and it jumped into the carriage. Tuck, tuck, tuck! Countless arrows fell on the black horse carriage, fiercely piercing the roof and the walls on both sides of the carriage. The crisp sound of impact sounded continuously outside the carriage, as if there would never be a moment to stop. However, the arrows did not cause any damage to the horse carriage. The arrows with great power hit the carriage heavily, and then it was tragically broken into two pieces, falling like real rain. The sharp arrowheads could not even enter the carriage, not even leaving a mark on it. However, the rain of arrows kept falling, and the sound of arrows falling continued. The sound of impact on the walls of the carriage kept echoing inside the carriage, and many clear sounds of arrows breaking could be heard. In a very short period of time, the thousands of cavalrymen of the left king's palace in the wilderness had already shot out 3 rain of arrows. The range of the grassland cavalrymen's hardwood bows was extremely long, and their shooting skills were even more amazing. At such a long distance, The thousands of arrows were actually controlled within an area of about 200 feet. At this time, the ground had already been pierced with arrows, densely packed, like weeds growing on the most fertile land. Some arrows even pierced above the first layer of arrow grass, which looked very funny. The arrows around the horse carriage were even denser, but most of the arrows that hit the carriage broke in the middle, so there was no long grass here, but more like a pile of straw, gradually drowning the horse carriage. The black horse carriage was made of stainless steel, and no matter how many arrows attacked, it could not be destroyed. However, being in such a dense rain of arrows, it still felt a little uneasy. Ning Ke hugged Sang Sang tightly in his arms. The carriage was very spacious, so the big black horse could enter. However, its body was also very big, so it could only bend its hooves and bury its head like a dog. It leaned on Ning Ke's knees in humiliation, like a pet. Sang Sang had been a little confused since they chose to go east outside Healan City. Finally, she could not help but ask softly, "Why are we here? What do you want to do?" The big black horse's head rested on the carriage, looking a little bored. Ning Ke reached out and touched the mane on its neck, saying, "I'm betting." Sang Sang frowned slightly and asked, "Betting on what?" Ning Ke said directly, "Betting that someone will come to save us." Sang Sang said straightforwardly, "No one will come to save us." After a moment of silence, Ning Ke said, "Indeed, no one will come to save us, but I think some people will not want to miss this opportunity. We have used so many arrows, those people should be more confident." Sang Sang vaguely guessed his thoughts and said, "I don't know if those people will come." Ning Ke said, "I don't know, maybe they're already here." Long Qing knew that the black horse carriage was very strong, but he still wanted to try. Now that he had basically controlled the left king's palace, no one dared to question any of his decisions. Moreover, under the secret operation of the West Hill Divine Palace, the left king's palace had received a large number of weapons from the Central Plains. He had the strength and the qualifications to waste them like this. After confirming that the rain of arrows could not cause any damage to the black horse carriage, he was not disappointed because thousands of cavalrymen had already arrived in front of the Healan Mountain Gap under the cover of the rain of arrows and began to charge. "Go!" He put the silver mask on his face again. More than a dozen fallen knight commanders responded in a low voice. Then they lifted the reins and rushed down from the cliff, leading thousands of grassland cavalrymen towards the black horse carriage at the gorge. The hoofbeats were like thunder, and the dust billowed. Thousands of cavalrymen poured into the Healan Mountain Gap, but there was no blockage. Instead, they poured in like a black tide and flowed back again, easily drowning the black horse carriage. Longqing was very clear that as long as the Tang army in Healan City did not come to rescue, Ning Ke would die today. No matter how strong a cultivator was, it was impossible to escape in such an environment. Healan City was more than 200 miles away from here, and the key was that the Tang army in that city could not come to rescue Ning Quebec. He no longer looked at the battlefield at the gorge, because the outcome of the battle was already determined, and it could not arouse any interest in him. Then Ning Ke, who was about to die, was once his lifelong enemy in the eyes of the world. Looking at the dark clouds in the sky, Longqing began to think about how to get the most benefits after catching Sang Sang, and how to avoid the dark clouds. After thinking about it, he found that his state of mind was a little restless. He could not help laughing at himself, and found that he still cared about Ning Ke's death. The dark clouds in the sky fell on his face, and fell on the bright silver mask. The silver mask became a little gray, just like his eyes. The next moment, the silver mask became even more gray. Longqing's smile suddenly froze. With a shrill cry, he jumped off the horse and swept down the cliff behind him like lightning. Rumbling sounds of impact rang out, mixed with the mournful neigh of a horse. Countless rocks rolled down from the cliff, smashing his mount into pieces of flesh and blood. It was a tragic sight to behold. If he had not reacted quickly, he would have become a wisp of ghost under the pile of stones. Prince Longqing suddenly turned around and looked at the cliff covered with snow, but he did not find any trace of the enemy. The silver mask on his face became dark again. It was not the dark clouds falling on it, nor the stones, but countless sharp and heavy axes flying over his head, falling on the heads of the cavalrymen in the gorge. There are only 2 chapters today, but I will still write a single chapter. Bow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 660. Countless rocks fell from the mountain peaks. Those rocks had snow on them and were wet from the melting snow. When they landed on the mountains and the cliffs, they smashed into countless pieces. Then they suddenly bounced into the air and continued to fall down. In the end, they landed on the heads of the cavalrymen at the exit of the canyon. After such a long distance, the speed of the stones had become terrifying, much more terrifying than the short spears that the grassland cavalrymen were used to throwing. The grassland cavalrymen were huddled together, and it was difficult for them to dodge. Countless stones fell on them, making muffled sounds of dust flying up. Some of them had large holes in their bodies, while others had their heads explode like ripe melons. The exit of the canyon was immediately dyed with blood and flesh. There were howls and neighs of horses everywhere. The troops were in a mess, and the horses were galloping, causing smoke and dust to rise. Many of the cavalrymen had blood on their faces, and under the blood was a look of despair. However, what happened next really made them despair, because after the stones fell, there was a rain of axe shadows. Countless sounds of breaking air were heard. At least 1,000 heavy axes were thrown from the cliffs, smashing into the grassland cavalrymen who were in chaos. The stones falling from the peak were heavy, and so were the axes. To be able to throw them such a long distance required a lot of strength. Logically speaking, only martial cultivators could have such an ability. However, it was impossible to find so many martial cultivators in the world, and they could also organize into a well-disciplined ambush army. After the sky, full of axes, there were earth-shattering shouts. More than 2,000 young men dressed in animal skins were jumping, running, and roaring as they charged down the cliff. They were not martial arts cultivators, but they were not weaker than martial arts cultivators. This was because they were desolate men, born warriors. This was a one-sided massacre. Dozens of heavy stones fell on the carriage, which shook it violently. Then there was a thundering sound. The arrows beside the black carriage were like grass, and the broken arrows that were like piles of grain. They were all smashed by the stones and then crushed into pieces. The pieces were dyed red by the flesh and blood of the grassland cavalrymen, looking unusually bright. The big black horse looked out of the carriage. He could not see what was happening outside, but he knew that the situation was changing. He could not help but feel nervous and curious. Ninkei whispered, "He's coming." The sounds of rocks falling, axes falling, and fighting continued without end. Only after a long time did it quiet down. Then there was a burst of intense cheers and shouts, and finally it returned to absolute silence. Ninkei got off the carriage with Sang Sang in his arms. Last winter, the Left King's palace had betrayed the agreement with the Desolate Man's tribe and secretly joined hands with the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army to launch a sneak attack on the main force of the Desolate Man. They chased them for hundreds of miles and suffered heavy casualties. This spring, under the leadership of Tang, the wayfarer of the Devil's Doctrine, the Desolate Man's tribe sneaked into the Tianqi Mountains for several nights. They arrived at the gap of the Gila Mountains and climbed up the peak. They then ambushed the cavalry of the Left Tent Palace. Out of the 3,000 cavalrymen of the Left King's palace, only a few hundred of them managed to escape. Out of the dozen or so fallen commanders, only 3 survived. Prince Longqing was seriously injured and only managed to escape from Tang's hands with the help of 2 hidden powerhouses of Haotian Taoism. There were corpses of grassland cavalrymen all around the canyon. Occasionally, there were a few war horses standing guard beside their masters in a daze. More than 2,000 powerful Desolate Man warriors raised their iron axes high in the air and cheered excitedly. This was the perfect revenge of the Desolate Man on their betrayers. However, the cheers of the Desolate Man warriors stopped faster than expected. They looked at the black carriage surrounded by corpses in the middle of the canyon and gradually quieted down. Their faces showed fear. The emotions of the desolate man warriors were not complicated. Compared to the people in other parts of the world who saw the black carriage, they were just afraid, very simply afraid. Especially when the door of the black carriage was opened and Ning Ke helped Sang Sang out. The desolate man warriors looked at the thin and weak little girl as if they were looking at the night that they were most afraid of. Many people are easily intoxicated by the pleasure of revenge, but I don't think it's interesting at all, even though I've been doing it for the first half of my life. Because revenge requires hatred first, and that means suffering losses first. Ning Ke looked at the powerhouse dressed in leather a few feet away and said, "The desolate man is a natural warrior. You led so many desolate men and still lost so badly last winter. It's really hard to imagine." Tang thought of the bloody battle in the camp of the coalition army on the snowy night last winter. Even someone as strong as him was silent for a moment, and then said, "You don't know how much power the West Hill Divine Palace has hidden." Ning Ke said, "I don't need to know these things. I only know that the desolate man is miserable now." Tang said, "No matter how miserable we are now, if it weren't for us, you would have died today." Ning Ke said, "I knew you would come. This has nothing to do with me or Sang Sang, so I don't need to thank you. I created such a good opportunity for you to ambush. If you can't even grasp it, the desolate man is not qualified to go south, let alone to restore their country. Wherever Sang Sang was, the sky full of dark clouds and black crows would be there." The black carriage went along the northern wilderness of the Tang Empire to the east, attracting many people's attention along the way. At Helan City, Ning Ke did not choose to go north, but east. He made such a big noise and exposed his whereabouts to attract the enemies of the eastern wilderness. The eastern wilderness had always been the sphere of influence of the left king's palace. Long Qing was now the master of this wilderness. Ning Ke knew that Long Qing would definitely appear first to use him and the cavalry of the left king's palace to attract Tang and the desolate man warriors. The whereabouts of the black carriage spread to the eastern wilderness. The West Hill Divine Palace and the Buddhism sect did not have time to react. Long Qing could make it in time, and so could the desolate man. Tang did not know Ning Ke's intentions. Even if he had some guesses, he could not be sure. But as Ning Ke said, the desolate man would not let go of this opportunity for revenge. That was why Tang and the desolate man warriors appeared here. Tang said, "We are here for revenge, so we will leave now." Ning Ke said, "Take us with you." Tang frowned slightly and said, "You know that's impossible." Ning Ke said, "Why?" "Even if you don't thank me, I want to hear if you have any reasons." Tang looked at Sang Sang beside him and said, "Because she is the daughter of Yama." Ning Ke said, "I remember that the desolate man worships Yama." Tang said, "Worshipping doesn't mean that they like him. It's more about fear. Ever since the desolate man believed in the Enlightenment doctrine, they have been worshipping Yama and begging him not to hurt us." Ning Ke said, "Sang Sang is the daughter of Yama. If the desolate man does not protect her now, how do you think Yama will punish you and your people on the day of the underworld invasion?" Tang said, "If she dies, Yama may never find the human world. Naturally, there will be no underworld invasion. In that case, why should my people worry about something that will not happen?" Ning Ke shook his head and said, "You believe in Yama. No one dares to kill her. Then the underworld invasion may happen. Why can't you prepare for the possible future?" Tang said, "If we take you in, the desolate man will be besieged and destroyed by the world before Yama appears." Ning Ke sneered and said, "For 1,000 years, who in the world has shown any kindness to the desolate man? Don't forget that you are still at war. Even without Sang Sang and me, the countries in the Central Plains will still want to destroy your people." Tang was silent. Ning Ke said again, "Whether we are taken in or not, the desolate man is the enemy of the whole world, and we are also the enemy of the whole world. Don't you think we should live together?" Tang said, "What good will it do for the desolate man if we take you in?" Ning Ke said with emotion, "Sang Sang and I are good to your sister. Can you not be so materialistic?" Tang repeated expressionlessly, "What good will it do?" Ning Ke looked a little helpless and then said seriously, "If the underworld invasion, the desolate man will have the most fertile land and the most sheep." For the desolate man, fertile land was their life. It was their lifelong goal, especially after being driven to the cold region of the far north for 1,000 years. It had become an irresistible temptation. There was still no change in Tang's expression. He stared into Ning Kei's eyes and said, "The underworld invasion and the everlasting night will come. The whole world will become extremely cold. No matter how fertile the land is, how can grass grow without sunlight? Without grass, where can sheep come from? Without sheep, how can the desolate man survive? We will all die in the end. Does it matter how big a place we live after death? Is it not important? I have seen many dignitaries spend the rest of their lives thinking about where to live after death and how big the grave should be. I thought this was important and the desolate man would care about it. Well, even if it is not important, I still promise that after the underworld invasion, the desolate man will become the most powerful ghost." Ning Kei said decisively, "I promise that I will make you feel happy even if you become ghosts." Tang said after a moment of silence, "I know you are the shame of the academy, but I did not expect you to be so shameless." Ning Kei thought hard but could not understand it. He asked what. Tang said, "For example, you are very shameless now." Ning Kei laughed. Tang said, "The future is too illusory and does not help in making a choice now. So your promise to the daughter of Yama is meaningless." Ning Kei said calmly, "If you take us in, the desolate man will have a very good warrior like me. Most importantly, with me, the academy will not join the war against the desolate man." Hearing this, Tang was silent for a long time. Then he said, "That is indeed very good. I admit that I am a little tempted, but the elders may not be willing to take you in." Ning Kei said, "You take us back first. I have a way to persuade them. If you have been in contact with Shoutang recently, you should know that I am best at deceiving old men." Tang handed over the wine bag and said, "Then it is settled. Is this a celebratory wine?" Ning Kei took the wine bag and drank a mouthful. "This is the first chapter. I will try to finish the second chapter before 11:30. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 661. Tang led more than 2,000 young and strong desolate man warriors. They had been wandering in the wilderness after winter. Relying on their familiarity with the Tianqi Mountains, they successfully avoided the pursuit of the Left King's Palace and the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army until they finally completed a perfect ambush at the canyon. There was no end to revenge. The Left King's Palace and the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army would definitely increase their efforts to wipe out the desolate. Tang led the desolate man warriors and began to retreat to the north. There was one more black horse carriage in the team. It was already spring in the Central Plains, but it was still snowing in the north of the wilderness. In the past few years, the desolate man who went south fought continuously with the Left King's Palace and the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army. In the end, they failed and were forced to retreat thousands of miles north to this bitter cold area. Compared with the frozen hot sea and the cold region of the far north, the climate here was tolerable for the desolate man and could even be considered warm. But for Ning Kei, especially the seriously ill Sang Sang, the climate here was a bit harsh. Tang arranged for the two of them to live in a relatively remote animal skin tent. Ning Kei looked at the camp of the desolate man's tribe, which stretched for more than 10 miles, and asked, "When are we going to meet the elders in the Senior Statesman Society?" "I'll deal with this first. You two wait here for the night." Tang handed over the wine bag tied around his waist. During the more than 10 days back to the north, Ning Kei was used to drinking this bitter wine made by the desolate man every day. He drank a few mouthfuls and felt that his body was much warmer. Sang Sang took the wine bag from his hand and sipped it. She looked delicate, but in fact, she did not stop drinking. After a while, the wine bag deflated. At this moment, there was a sudden muffled sound beside her. Ning Kei did not know why he fell to the ground. Looking at the way he kept smacking his lips, he should be fine and seemed to have fallen asleep. Sang Sang felt a little strange. Compared to her, Ning Kei's tolerance for alcohol was extremely poor. But he did not get drunk after drinking so many times. Suddenly, she seemed to think of something and looked up at Tang. Her eyes were very bright, and her thin eyebrows were knitted very seriously. For some reason, Tang suddenly felt a little cold when he saw her expression. He laughed at himself and said, "I just put some herbal powder to relax his mind and let him have a good sleep. It won't hurt him." Sang Sang said, "He's in good health now. He shouldn't have been poisoned." Tang said, "I've been practicing the Enlightenment doctrine since I was a child, so I know his physical condition very well. Moreover, the wine was mixed with medicinal powder, not poison, so he will still fall asleep. I didn't expect this wine to be useless to you." He looked at Sang Sang and asked after a moment of silence, "Are you really Yama's daughter?" Sang Sang nodded. Tang said, "I don't know what the senior statesman's attitude towards your arrival is. I know that Ninkei is a very dangerous person, so I don't want him to interfere in the internal discussion of the desolate man. I understand," said Sang Sang. Tang added, "If the elders don't agree to take you in, you will die." Sang Sang said, "We came here to gamble." Dun said, "But this is his gamble." Sang Sang said, "I can accept the result." Dun said nothing more. Snowflakes kept falling into the desolate man's camp. The countless tents that had been filled with laughter and singing became quiet. It was not because of sadness or the hardships of life. The desolate man had long learned to calmly face the death of their clansmen. They had lived a hard life for 1,000 years. The silence was because of the quarrel coming from the tent in the center of the camp, and also because of the black horse carriage parked outside the camp. The tent in the center of the camp was not much different from the other tents. The only difference was that there were dozens of slender ribbons tied to the tent, which added a sense of warmth and mystery. The highest authority of the desolate man's tribe was the senior statesman. Because the matter that was to be discussed today was too important, more than 20 desolate man leaders were also sitting in the field. Anyway, we're going to fight the people of the Central Plains. It's not a big deal to take in the daughter of Yama. The West Hill Divine Palace hasn't really invested in the past few years. Prince Longqing is just a dog raised by Haotian Taoism. If they know that we have taken in the daughter of Yama, do you think the war will continue like this? By then, the enemies we will face will be 10 times stronger than now. What's the difference between waiting for the Central Plains countries to send more troops and waiting for the West Hill Divine Palace to send more powerhouses into the wilderness? After all, there will be a bloody battle. It has nothing to do with us, no matter how strong they are. Time. The most important thing is time. If there is no daughter of Yama, the Central Plains countries and the West Hill Divine Palace will still want to preserve their strength and let others die in our hands. We can buy time for the women to give birth to more children and let more children become real warriors. If there is no time, we can't hold on. But have you thought about it? Ninkei promised that as long as we take in the daughter of Yama, the Academy will not participate in this war. If the powerhouses from the second floor of the Academy come to the wilderness, they will be more terrible than the West Hill Divine Palace. Ninkei fled with the daughter of Yama, which is equivalent to betraying the human world. Why would the Academy remain neutral because of him? I don't think his words have any credibility. The most important problem is that we, the desolate, have worshipped Yama for 1,000 years. Now that the daughter of Yama is wandering in the world, but we don't take her in or protect her, what's the point of worshipping her for 1,000 years? We, the desolate, have been worshipping Yama for 1,000 years, but we still live in such a miserable way. Moreover, the underworld invasion will not do us any good. Are we really going to be the vanguard of the underworld? I don't want to be a ghost soldier. The desolate in the tent had completely different opinions on whether to take in Ninkei and the daughter of Yama. The dispute continued without a conclusion. The first elder and the most powerful Tang remained silent. The two sides were in a deadlock and even began to influence each other. The old and prudent elders gradually became hot-blooded, while the hot-blooded and impulsive warriors became more worried. But there was still no conclusion. Gradually, more and more people were inclined to kill Ninkei and Sang Sang for the safety of the desolate tribe. The first elder stood up with difficulty and walked to the table in the middle of the tent. His skinny body, which had been eroded by time and bad environment for many years, seemed to fall apart with just a few shakes. There were some things messily piled up on the wooden table. There were golden leaves, a thick stack of notes, and a few waste tokens. These are all things that Tang found on Ning, Quebec. The first elder's skinny palm moved slowly on the table and said, "Return these things to the daughter of Yama later. No matter whether we kill or keep them, we must maintain the due respect." Tang calmly agreed and walked to the table, ready to put away the things. The first elder's fingers suddenly trembled like old bamboo in the wind. Tang looked at the direction of the old man's finger. His pupils slightly shrank and his body became a little stiff. After a long silence, he realized that everything was predestined. The first elder glanced at him and sighed. "In that case, let them stay." Tang nodded and said, "I think so too." The elders and the warriors in the tent were very surprised. Even those who were willing to take in Ning Ke and Sang Sang were a little shocked. They did not understand why the first elder and the powerful Tang, who had been silent all the time, suddenly showed their attitude at this time, and it was such a clear and firm attitude. The first elder picked up a thing on the table and let everyone see it with their own eyes. It was a waste token. It was not made of gold, wood, or stone, and no one knew what it was made of. It was pure white, with a black pattern carved in relief. Looking at the fresh marks on the edge, it seemed to be carved not long ago. The black pattern was a statue. It seemed to be a human, but it also seemed to be some kind of god. The pure white exterior looked like a boundless radiance. Because the person or god had his back to the light, his face and body were immersed in deep shadows, and it was impossible to see clearly. It was quiet in the tent, and the sound of snowflakes falling on the roof became extremely clear. The first elder said slowly, "More than 1,000 years ago, the great divine priest of light brought the tomes of arcane into the wilderness to preach. We, the desolate, believed in the enlightenment doctrine and worshipped Yama. 1,000 years later, we returned to the south and met the daughter of Yama and the successor of the great divine priest of light. This is probably the so-called fate. In that case, we have to finish this even if our race is exterminated." Tang looked at the warriors and said solemnly, "Back then, I accepted disciples on behalf of my teacher and taught you the enlightenment doctrine's cultivation method so that the inheritance could continue. Now that the inheritance has reappeared, you should know what to do." The warriors knelt on one knee and very respectfully saluted. They answered in unison, "We pledge our lives to serve you." Ning Ke woke up with a headache. At first, he thought it was because of his alcohol tolerance and felt a little ashamed. Later, he found out that Tang had drugged him, so he became angry. However, when he knew the final decision of the desolate senior statesman, joy and excitement immediately replaced all the negative emotions. However, there were still some things that he could not understand. A few years ago in the wilderness, he had heard from Imo Shanshan that the devil's doctrine and the desolate man believed in Yama, but they were extremely afraid of Yama's descent into the world. In their teachings, Yama's descent into the world meant the arrival of darkness, and the desolate man did not like darkness either. That was why he could understand the desolate man's fear and respect for Sang Sang, but they were unwilling to take her in. So what made the desolate man suddenly change his attitude and become so positive? In the 18th year of the Tianqi era, there was a strange sign in the sky. There were thick clouds that did not disperse, and the cawing of crows was unpleasant. It started from the Yuluan kingdom, passed through the swamp, past the Tang border, crossed the Helan, and arrived at the eastern wilderness before continuing north. The whole world knew that Ning Ke had brought Sang Sang, the daughter of Yama, into the desolate man's tribe. The West Hill Divine Palace sent a letter to the senior statesmen of the desolate man's tribe, ordering them to kill or hand over the Yama maiden immediately. In return, the West Hill Divine Palace promised to stop attacking the desolate man and open up a large pasture in the eastern wilderness to help the desolate man rebuild their country. The senior statesmen of the desolate calmly and firmly rejected the request of the West Hill Divine Palace. The West Hill Divine Palace announced to the world that all cultivators were to enter the wilderness. There was already a steady flow of provisions into the wilderness, and all countries began to recruit soldiers. The West Hill Divine Palace said in the rescript that this was no longer just a war against the desolate man, but a holy war to save the world. The real war was about to begin. Try to finish the next chapter before 2 o'clock. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 662. In the 18th year of Tianqi era, the war between the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army and the Desolate broke out. There was no foreshadowing, no negotiation, and no probing. Hundreds of thousands of troops from both sides began to fight on the wilderness. Countless people died every moment. Those cultivators, who were usually aloof and arrogant, fought desperately like ordinary soldiers on the storm-like battlefield. Even the strong men in the see-through realm could become nameless corpses in the grass at any time. The West Hill Divine Palace, which had been low-key in the past few years, finally showed the demeanor and majesty of ruling the world. The hierarch lord of the West Hill Divine Palace led the two great divine priests of revelation and judgment, as well as the powerful cavalrymen of the divine halls, to the wilderness. The emperor of the South Jin Kingdom, Crown Prince Chongming of the Yin Kingdom, and the kings of the Central Plains all came to their senses after the shock. They gathered their troops as quickly as possible and personally led their troops into the wilderness to fight. A few days later, another shocking news came from Chong. The Tang Emperor, Li Zhongyi, had led the Tang cavalrymen into the wilderness more than 10 days ago and was about to arrive at Healing City. It was not until then that the billions of Hao-Ian believers in the world finally realized that the underworld invasion was not just a legend. Otherwise, why would the major powers in the world be so nervous and gather such a terrifying army into the wilderness just because of the daughter of Yama? The Tang Empire had more than 100,000 troops in the wilderness. The northeast border military had all left Tuyang City. Under the leadership of General Xian Zhilong, they went straight to the north along the Yin border. It only took them a short time to reach the main battlefield in the depths of the wilderness and join the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army. Although the Tang Empire's most powerful northern army was responsible for monitoring and intimidating the Golden Palace, they still sent more than half of their troops to Healing City with the Emperor's entourage. I wonder how many soldiers will return to the Tang Empire after this war. The Tang Emperor, Li Zhongyi, stood on the eastern city wall of Healing City. He looked at the northern army cavalrymen at the bottom of the valley who were marching eastward. He looked calm, but deeply emotional. Master Huang Yang stood beside the emperor, silently chanting with his palms pressed together. The Healing general, Han Qing, stood behind the emperor. He thought that he was the emperor's most loyal servant, so he should say many things that other officials and generals found inconvenient. Your Majesty, it is true that you can show the military power by leading the army, but it is too dangerous to go far away from the country, especially since the nation master cannot accompany us and the academy did not send anyone. The emperor waved his hand and stopped Han Qing's remonstrance. He said, "The memorials in the court came like snowflakes. The four generals, led by Su Shi, wanted to write a letter in blood. They just didn't want me to leave Chang'an. If I hadn't seen the opportunity and left a few days earlier, I'm afraid some officials would have hit the palace wall. Now I've listened to your advice and stayed in Healing City instead of advancing eastward. Are you still not satisfied?" Han Qing was not in the mood to be proud. He thought of the fierce battlefield hundreds of miles away from the east of the valley and the powerful cultivators who were so close to His Majesty. He said in a trembling voice, "I still think that Your Majesty should return to the northern military camp, even if you want to take command of the army." Han Qing was half a barbarian. If he did not have the emperor's trust, it would be difficult for him to reach such a high position in the Tang army. So he was most afraid of being called a barbarian. But His Majesty was different. He called Han Qing barbarian out of habit. Han Qing only felt close and proud. The emperor was slightly annoyed and said, "I have let you guard Healing City for so many years. Do you still think that Healing City cannot be defended?" Han Qing was shocked and said in a low voice, "Healing City is impregnable. But Your Majesty, there are many powerful cultivators in the wilderness." The emperor said, "The desolate man's cultivators have to deal with the bigwigs in the West Hill Divine Palace. They're all miserable. How can they have the energy to assassinate me?" There was no one else on the city wall. Han Qing glanced at Master Huang Yang and said in a low voice after a moment of struggle, "Your Majesty, I am worried about the bigwigs in the Divine Hall." At this time, the hierarch lord of the West Hill Divine Palace had come to the Eastern Wilderness. There were also the two great divine priests of Revelation and Judgment, as well as the visiting professors hidden by Haotian Taoism in various countries. This lineup was more than luxurious. It was the most magnificent lineup in the past 100 years. No other place could have such a lineup except the Academy. His Majesty was slightly startled and then laughed out loud. He said, "Haotian Taoism has always disliked the Tang Empire. Now that I rarely leave Chong, and it is hard to say whether they will have any ideas. Your worry is reasonable, but I don't believe that the bigwigs in the Divine Hall would really dare to harm me." Han Qing could not help but feel bitter when he heard the heroic tone in His Majesty's words. He knew that it was hard to persuade the Tangs when it came to courage, but he was still not reconciled. He said, "Half of the Northern Army has been transferred to the Eastern Wilderness. What if the Golden Tribe is not stable? Your Majesty should go to the Northern Military Camp." His Majesty slightly frowned and said, "With Su Qi in the Northern Military Camp, what should I worry about?" Su Qi was one of the four great generals of the Tang Empire. He had always been calm and low-key. He was not as famous as the Defender General of the State Su Shi or the Defender General Xiao Ho, but this general's defense was unparalleled. He had been in charge of the Northern Army because the Tang Empire and the Golden Tribe Royal Court wanted to maintain peace. Han Qing could not slander General Su Qi's ability. He could not help sweating anxiously. The emperor looked at his dispirited expression and could not help laughing. He waved his hand to dismiss him. The sun was setting in the west, shining on Helan City. The eastern city wall was slightly dark. The Tang cavalry had all passed through the gorge to the eastern wilderness, but His Majesty was still standing on the city wall. He held the railing and looked into the distance thoughtfully. His hair had turned white, but his face did not show any signs of aging. He was just much thinner than before. The wilderness was much colder than Chang'an. There was no sunlight at this time. The wild wind blew through the gorge. His Majesty slightly frowned and raised his fist to his lips to suppress his coughing. Then he took out a bottle of elixir and swallowed one. Cough suppressant can only treat the symptoms but not the root cause. It is not good for your body if you take too much. Master Huang Yang looked at him and said worriedly. He and His Majesty had known each other for many years. After returning from Xiankong Temple, they became sworn brothers. So he spoke and acted very directly, unlike ordinary officials. His Majesty smiled and said, "After so many years, I still can't cure the root cause. Then I will make myself comfortable." Huang Yang asked, "Your Majesty, are you really not worried?" His Majesty slightly frowned and said, "Worried about what? That Shan Yu of the Golden Tribe Royal Court or those charlatans of the West Hill Divine Palace? I have more than 100,000 cavalrymen outside. I don't believe that the Golden Palace dares to come." Huang Yang looked at His Majesty's calm and confident expression and could not help smiling. He thought that he had forgotten that His Majesty was once an invincible general in the northern borderline when he was the crown prince. The Golden Palace had suffered a lot in his hands and would not dare to challenge him. But the emperor guessed that he was worried about the same as Han Qing. He shook his head and said, "If the West Hill Divine Palace wants me dead, they must attack with all their strength. But now their target is the desolate man and the daughter of Yama. Moreover, they would not dare to assassinate me." After a moment of silence, Huang Yang said, "In fact, I am more worried about Chang'an." His Majesty slightly frowned and asked, "Do you think it is inappropriate for the princess to supervise the country?" Huang Yang thought that it was not only him who thought it was inappropriate for the princess to supervise the country. Countless officials of the Tang Empire and even the people on the streets thought it was inappropriate. His Majesty had traveled to the wilderness and brought those two with him. If anything happened, Chang and would be in turmoil. Without waiting for his reply, His Majesty said indifferently, "I know what you are worried about. Those worries are meaningless. Even if something really happened to me, who would dare to disobey the edict?" Master Huang Yang calmly said, "The edict is only effective if it is seen by people." His Majesty said, "If I die first, who would dare to do such a rebellious thing as the headmaster of the academy and the headmaster of the academy? Han Qing is worried about my safety, and you are worried about the safety of the country. That is because you have not figured out one thing. If you want to destroy the Tang Empire, you must first kill the headmaster of the academy, then kill me, and then destroy the entire academy. But in this world, who can do that?" Huang Yang slowly shook his head and said, "But the headmaster of the academy is old after all. The headmaster of the academy will never be old." His Majesty obviously had the second half of his sentence. But for some reason, perhaps because he was touched, he slowly said after a moment of silence, "In fact, I am really old." Huang Yang knew that His Majesty had always been in poor health. He understood that what he meant by old was actually an illness. He could not help but feel a little depressed. But then he thought that life and death were common things, and there was no need to worry about it. Knowing that Huang Yang had thought it through, His Majesty laughed and reached out to touch his bald head. This was something he was used to doing many years ago. But Master Huang Yang had not been touched so disrespectfully for many years, so he could not get used to it. His appearance of a high monk suddenly disappeared, and he angrily stared at the emperor. The emperor's smile gradually disappeared. He looked at him and calmly said, "Worrying about life and death is futile. But the affairs after death need to be arranged in advance. I have already thought about it. I will pass the throne to Xiaolu." The angry expression on Huang Yang's face suddenly froze. After a long time, he came to his senses and said in surprise, "How can such an important matter be decided so casually? And why did your Majesty let me know first?" The emperor said, "Weren't you worried about the effect of the edict? You are the executor of the edict." Huang Yang said bitterly, "I don't have this ability. This should be the Academy's business." The emperor shook his head and said, "The Academy is not allowed to interfere in the court affairs. This is the iron rule set by the headmaster of the Academy. There was Ning Ke originally. I wanted him to carry out my edict, but now he is fighting against the whole world and even me for his wife. How can I still use him?" Huang Yang thought of that rumor and frowned even more. He looked at the back of the tower. The emperor knew what he was thinking and calmly said, "I heard that Professor Yu Lian of the Academy took in a female disciple the year before last." Huang Yang said, "Yes. It is said that she is the younger sister of Wayfarer Tang of the Devil's Doctrine." The emperor looked at him and said, "The Academy does not care about it. I do not care. The Tang Empire does not need to care either. As for your and Qingshan's worries, I will let Xiaolu become Mr. First Disciple after returning to Chang'an." Huang Yang put his palms together and sincerely praised. "Then there will be no problem. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 663. Huang Yang asked, "But I still don't understand why your Majesty wants to lead the army in person. In the eyes of the people, the officials, you and Qingshan, there must be a lot of hidden thoughts. Many people are guessing, but it is actually for a very simple reason." The emperor laughed and said, "I have been emperor for more than 10 years and have lived in Chang'an for more than 10 years. I have missed too many things in the world. If the underworld really invades from the north, it must be the most spectacular scene in thousands of years. I certainly don't want to miss it." Hearing this, Huang Yang laughed and then sighed helplessly. He thought that His Majesty was indeed such a person. When he was about to ask more questions, he heard footsteps behind him. The Empress walked out of the tower holding a little boy and whispered something from time to time. When her eyes fell on the little boy, she seemed so gentle and satisfied. The Emperor went to greet them. The little boy was wearing bright yellow clothes. He had inherited the advantages of his parents. He was handsome, but he looked a little timid. It was not because he had inherited his parents' temperament, but because he was influenced by them. But from the childish smile on his face, it could be seen that he liked to be with his parents. Huang Yang looked at the happy family of three and smiled. He looked out of the city gate tower and saw the setting sun shining on the wilderness. The valley was dark and gloomy, but the chill in the wind was no longer bone-piercing. It seemed that summer was coming. In a side hall of the imperial palace in Chang, Liu looked at the young man who was writing with a brush. Her expression was so gentle and satisfied. The former young prince, Li Huiyuan, had entered the stage of his youth. Compared with a few years ago, he looked a little thinner and more handsome. There was a heroic and calm air in his eyes. Li Huiyuan had become quieter than before in the past 2 years. It seemed that he had a lot of ideas. Li thought it was not a bad thing. On the contrary, she thought it was good. She felt that she could finally live up to her dead mother. At this moment, she was no longer the most powerful princess of the Tang Empire. She was just a sister. His Majesty personally led the army to the wilderness, and she was appointed to supervise the country. Every day, she was responsible for dealing with memorials in the main hall. It seemed that she should be very busy, but in fact, she was not. The Tang Empire had its own rules. Most of the things were decided by the Prime Minister and various ministers. She was more like a monitor and occasionally a judge. Liu knew very well that at times like this, the calmer she should be, so she calmly carried out the task of supervising the country and received praise from many ministers in the court. Most of the rest of the time, she spent it on seemingly casual exchanges with the ministers and other matters. "Sister, what do you think of my handwriting?" Li Huiyuan presented the newly written scroll to Li Yu as if presenting a treasure. He said proudly, "The teachers of the imperial school all said that I wrote well. My father will definitely like it." Li Yu praised him, then looked at him and said, "Even if my father likes calligraphy, you should not use the post road to send letters. Now that the war is about to start, be careful of affecting the post road. How much effort can a piece of paper take?" Li Huiyuan said carelessly, "I want to open the transmission array in the palace to send a letter to my father, but no one will agree. My father likes calligraphy, but he cares more about the future of the Tang Empire. The transmission array is so important that it consumes a lot of energy to open it. How can he let you fool around?" Liu said coldly. Then she seemed to think of something and looked a little sad. She said softly, "You see, Ning Ke was favored by my father, but now he has become an abandoned person." Li Huiyuan said, "We are my father's children. How can Ning Ke be compared to us?" Li did not answer. She looked at her brother and said sternly, "Now Ning Ke can't be counted on, and the academy can't stand out to support us. It seems that the situation is good now. You and I have to be more careful." Seeing her serious expression, Li Huiyuan's heart trembled slightly. He hurriedly agreed, but there was an obvious look of disapproval in his eyes. He slightly raised the corner of his mouth, as if he had confidence that even Li Yu did not have. "I plan to go to the south gate to see the nation master," he said. Li Yu frowned slightly. She had been wondering why the nation master, who had been on good terms with the empress all these years, began to support her and her brother after Ning Ke passed by Qinghe Prefecture on his way to the Lang Temple. The nation master of the Tang Empire, Li Qingshan, could at least influence half of the Southern Gate Temple and the Imperial Center administration. No matter how she looked at it, the change in his attitude was excellent news for Li Yu and her brother. She said, "The nation master is seriously ill and bedridden. It's not convenient for me to leave the palace. You should visit him more often." In the 17th year of the Tianqi era, there were endless funerals in Chang'an. It was difficult to remove the white banners. Many elders of the three dynasties and important ministers of the old days could not withstand the invasion of time and left the world sadly. Defender General of the State, Su Shi, and the nation master of the Tang Empire, Li Qingshan, were also seriously ill, which made many people feel uneasy. "I have been cultivating all my life, but I haven't made much progress in other aspects. I can be the nation master of the Tang Empire because His Majesty gave me face in the past. The only thing I am proud of is the method of deduction with the chessboard." The dark floor of the Southern Gate Temple was covered with thick bedding. Li Qingshan lay on the soft bedding and looked at the spring scenery outside the window. He smiled faintly and said to He Mingchi, who was by the window, "I have always been a little dissatisfied with the great divine priest of revelation, and even thought that Elder Chishan was just so-so. Until now, I understand that God's will is unpredictable. Those two are far more intelligent than me, and can see much more clearly than I can. I forced myself to use the chessboard to deduce the future, so I vomited more blood and became weaker. Hao Ian's favor gradually faded, so it is normal for me to die early." He Mingchi looked a little sad, but he did not know what to say. His Majesty led the army into the wilderness. Logically speaking, Li Qingshan, as the nation master of the Tang Empire, should accompany the emperor. However, because of his serious illness, he stayed in Chang and was replaced by the emperor's younger brother, Master Huangyang. "I'm not worried about my life. Monk Huangyang is with His Majesty, and there are so many powerhouses in the army, so I'm not worried about His Majesty's safety. I am worried about something else." The smile on Li Qingshan's face gradually disappeared, and he looked a little tired. He said, "His Majesty took the Empress and Little Six to Healan City this time, but left the Princess in Chang and City to supervise the state. Many ministers, and even the people of Chang, and think that His Majesty is going to pass the throne to Li Huiyuan." After a short pause, he continued, "But who knows His Majesty better than me? His Majesty is not the kind of ambitious and ruthless monarch who relies on the so-called strategy to rule the country. His Majesty is a true hero with a heroic spirit. If he has decided to pass the throne to someone, he will definitely announce it to the world. He will definitely not probe or use this kind of method, because this kind of method is too petty. He is unwilling and disdainful of using it." Hearing this, He Mingchi's body slightly stiffened, and he asked in a low voice, "Master, what are you worried about?" Li Qingshan looked at the thick green leaves outside the window and thought of the coming summer. He said slowly, "I am worried that this is an empty joy, and it is easy to have problems after an empty joy." At this time, a voice came from outside the temple. He Mingchi got up and went forward. After a while, he walked into the temple with Prince Li Huiyuan and said gently, "Master, the prince is here to see you." Li Qingshan looked at Li Huiyuan's face, which was becoming more and more like His Majesty's, and his heart was slightly warm. After Li Huiyuan's visit, he returned to the palace. He Mingchi received the master's order to go to the palace, so he followed him in the sedan chair. The Southern Gate Temple was very close to the palace, so they could not talk for a long time. It was very dark in the sedan chair, and Li Huiyuan's handsome eyes looked a bit blurred. He looked at He Mingchi, who was sitting opposite him silently, and said after a moment of silence, "Mystery told me about that the year before last. Later, I sent people to investigate for a long time, but they found no evidence." He Mingchi smiled and did not say anything, but he still looked at Li Huiyuan's eyes. It was not that he did not want to discuss this issue, but that he wanted to hear Li Huiyuan's explanation more clearly. A little annoyance appeared in Li Huiyuan's eyes, and he asked, "The Empress is really the saintess of diabolism?" He Mingchi wanted to hear this direct and clear answer, so he nodded and said, "Although there is no evidence, my master knows about it, and the Academy should also know about it, and they can find evidence. I know what your Highness is thinking. The Southern Gate Temple has been worshipping Hao Ian for generations, and they certainly do not want the son of the saintess of diabolism to become the Tang Emperor." Hearing this, Li Huiyuan suddenly relaxed, and his eyes showed joy and excitement. He rubbed his hands nervously and said with some annoyance and helplessness, "Why does the nation master still not reveal the true identity of the demoness?" "Because His Majesty will not agree." He Mingchi looked at him and said calmly, "Your Highness, please remember that no matter how powerful a weapon is, it can only be used at the right moment. So please pretend that you don't know anything about it, and don't tell anyone, including the princess." Li Huiyuan frowned slightly and wanted to say something, but they had arrived at the imperial palace. He Mingchi followed him into the palace and first went to see Li Yu. He said a few words and then walked to somewhere in the palace. These years, he often went to the palace with the nation master, so he could come and go as he pleased. Moreover, the eunuchs and maids knew that this Taoist official of the Southern Gate Temple was respected by the princess and the prince, so no one stopped him. After a while, he walked to a small building in the depths of the Imperial Garden. He reached out and separated the dense green branches outside the building, stepped over the wildflowers and weeds that no one cared about, and walked into the small building. Following the dark passage at the bottom of the small building, Mingxi walked down to the empty underground hall. He looked around and saw the luminous pearls hanging in the air like stars, illuminating the whole space. He knew what the underground hall was and what was needed to activate it. But Ning Ke might have given the array I pestle to the academy for safekeeping, and neither he nor the nation master could do anything about it. Standing on the empty ground, Mingxi imagined the scene after the array was activated. He slowly closed his eyes and opened his arms, as if he was standing under the night sky, embracing the whole world. The next chapter will be out before 12 o'clock. It will be shorter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 664. Mingxi was standing on the array eye of the God-stunning array. In other words, it was the array eye of the God-stunning array. That was why he felt that he could embrace the whole world if he opened his arms. However, it only took him a short time to wake up from this feeling. Earlier, when he had passed through the deep passageway, he should have been killed by the runes carved on the stone walls of the passageway. Other than the emperor, who had the Great Seal, and the person in charge of the array eye, no one else could enter this place. Mingxi naturally had his own way to come here. He had told Princely Huiyuan that no matter how powerful a weapon was, it could only be used at the right time. Now, standing in the most powerful array eye of the God-stunning array, he thought that no matter how powerful a weapon was, it could only be used if it was in the right hands. There is only one true God in the world, Hao Yin. The name of the array, Eye of Chong, and was a blasphemy to Hao Yin. Mingxi thought that the only meaning of the array Eye was to destroy it. It was late spring. Even the northernmost part of the wilderness was warm. The forest was turning green and the grass was growing. However, it would only be green when summer came. Ning Ke and Sang Sang had been living in the Desolate Man's tribe for a long time. In these days, apart from taking care of Sang Sang, the most important thing he did was to write talismans and cultivate the great spirit in bladesmanship. Behind the Desolate Man's tribe, tens of thousands of powerful Desolate Man soldiers were fighting in the south. Even the powerhouses of the Buddhism and Taoism sects could not threaten him and Sang Sang. But Ning Ke knew that the Desolate Man could not win this war. Besides, he was not used to leaving his life in the hands of the outside world. Therefore, he cultivated even harder. The dry branch gently scratched the freshly defrosted soil, squeezing out mud and leaving a deep mark. It looked no different from writing on paper with a brush. It was the word, too. Ning Ke looked at the word quietly. He picked up the branch and wrote another word. In a short period of time, he had written at least 30 words. Each word was different and had its own meaning. His writing became more and more illegible until the last few words seemed to be connected. However, he was still not satisfied. He felt that the connection was wrong. He did not know what was wrong, but he was sure it was wrong. He silently looked at the strokes on the ground, his brows slightly furrowed, appearing extremely serious. Time to eat. A Desolate Man woman wearing a hat and animal skin cotton-padded clothes walked behind him and whispered. Ning Ke came to his senses and followed the Desolate Woman to the tent. Coincidentally, the Desolate Woman sent by the Desolate Senior Statesman to serve them was the same one he and Imo Shanshan met when they entered the wilderness a few years ago. However, the Desolate boy who participated in the winter ceremony had already become a warrior and was not in the tribe. The Desolate men worshipped Yama and feared him. Therefore, they were in awe of Sang Sang. At least 90% of them were absolutely afraid of her. The Desolate Woman was no exception. In particular, the dark clouds and a dozen black crows that came with Sang Sang made the old, weak women and children in the tribe even more afraid. They could often see people kowtowing to the sky and the black crows on Song Song's tent. The desolate woman did not even dare to return to her own tent at first. It was not until she saw it for a long time that she became a little used to it. Today's lunch was meat soup and pancakes. There was a lot of meat in the meat soup, which was probably more than the meat in the bowls of all the women and children in the tribe. As for the pancakes, only Ning Ke and Sang Sang had such treatment. The mutton soup was very stewed. The soup was milky white and exuded a natural fragrance. Ning Ke scooped a bowl of soup and took 2 pancakes. He signaled the desolate woman to eat the rest or share it with the neighbors. Then he walked into the tent and helped Sang Sang, who had just woken up. He tore the pancakes and soaked them in the soup and fed her. Sang Sang's little face was no longer as pale as it was during the escape. She returned to her usual dark complexion, but she did not get better. Instead, she became heavier and had no appetite. She shook her head and said, "No." Then drink a few more mouthfuls of soup. Ning Ke brought the soup bowl to her lips and carefully fed her. Sang Sang suddenly coughed. It was not because she was choking on the soup. She had been coughing very badly these days. The coughing echoed in the tent for a long time. She looked very painful. Ning Ke's lapel was full of the soup she coughed out. The milky soup mixed with the blood she coughed out turned black. Ning Ke held her in his arms and gently stroked her back. He kissed her forehead and whispered something. He seemed to be humming a song. Sang Sang gradually calmed down and breathed steadily. Then she gradually fell asleep. The fire talisman in the clay pot helped to ignite the firewood. The temperature in the tent suddenly rose, and then quickly dimmed down when it was suppressed by the cold air. It was still as cold as the underworld. Ning Ke withdrew his fingers and looked at the frost on the edge of the brazier. He was silent for a long time. Then he reached into the quilt and held Sang Sang's cold little feet. He kept rubbing them. He didn't get up until her feet were warm. He took off his coat that was stained with blood and changed his underwear that was soaked with sweat and frozen into ice by the cold air. Then he walked out of the tent. He looked up at the dark clouds. Facing the penetrating sunlight, the frost on his eyelashes gradually melted into water. Sang Sang's illness was getting worse. Neither the Haotian divine light cultivated by Haotian Taoism nor the Buddha's breath comprehended by Buddhism could suppress or pacify the cold aura. More and more coldness seeped out of her small body. No matter if it was the strong wine or the seal fire, it was difficult for her to feel warm. The bedding and clothes were as cold as ice, and the entire tent was as cold as an ice house. The desolate woman had found another tent to live in 10 days ago. The field was green in spring, but the ground around his and Sang Sang's tent was still frozen like another world. What worried Ning Ke the most now was Sang Sang's illness. If there was no way to cure Sang Sang's illness, it would be meaningless even if the Desolate could defeat the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army. Even if he could be invincible. That was why he kept cultivating and learning. Part of the reason was to make himself stronger. More importantly, he wanted to find a way to eliminate the cold aura in Sang Sang's body by reading the Buddha's notes. Also, because the Desolate man had the tradition of worshipping Yama, he learned a lot about it. In the Desolate's sacrificial ceremony, Yama's full name was Immortal Guangming. He always felt that he had seen it in the Buddha's notes or some Taoist classics. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't find it. Just like that, spring gradually came, spring gradually left, and summer gradually came. Sang Sang's body and Ning Ke's mood kept walking into the cold winter and were gradually covered by ice and snow. That's all for today. I'll write a detailed outline and write 3 chapters tomorrow. Then I'll recommend Jean Shuinja's new book, Doomsday Show, book number 2524045. I believe everyone is very familiar with Jean Shuinja, so I won't boast about him here. Say something for myself. I'm very grateful to you, and I'll work hard. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 665. There is no good news in the South, only bad news. Every once in a while, a list would be sent back to the tribe from the battlefield. Each name on the list represented a dead, desolate man soldier. The desolate man was simple and firm, very similar to the Tangs. No matter what difficulties they faced, they could be silent, but they would not be depressed. Even if the situation was harsh, the women would occasionally sing songs while washing clothes or hunting. As time passed, the war in the South became more and more brutal. The frequency of the list being sent back was getting slower and slower, but the length was getting longer and longer. The old, weak, women and children who stayed in the tribe were no longer in the mood to sing. The entire field became quieter and the atmosphere more and more depressing. Every night, faint cries could be heard. No matter how strong a desolate woman was, she could not hold back her sadness when she saw her son's name on the list. One day, the desolate woman who was responsible for taking care of Ning Ke and Sang Sang finally saw her son's name on the list. She began to cry, and the women nearby gathered around to comfort her. Ning Ke put down the heavy curtain of the tent and walked back to the bed to continue feeding Sang Sang medicine. Sang Sang stopped after 2 sips. She looked up at him and said, "What's the point of hiding here? I'm going to die eventually. Don't feel guilty. The desolate man is like us. We are not tolerated in the world. Even if they did not take us in, the West Hill Divine Palace and the countries in the Central Plains would not allow them to continue living." Ning Ke said. Sang Sang shook her head gently and said, "But if we did not come, they would not die so quickly." After saying this, she opened her palm and looked at the black chess piece in her palm in a daze. This chess piece was the only one she had played in the last game of chess in the Lang Temple. More and more people died in the tribe, and she became more and more ill. The tent became colder and colder, and everything was covered with a thin layer of frost. Only the black chess piece in her hand was still warm. Ning Ke held her in his arms and said, "Don't worry. Even if the desolate man cannot hold on, we can still go to the north. We can go to the scenery of the hot sea." Eldest brother said that although the sea is frozen, if we can break the ice, we can still find a few peony fish. The old yellow ox loves it, so it should taste good. Sang Sang said, "You know, I'm not worried about this." Ning Ke was silent. Sang Sang said in a low voice, "From the Lang Temple to the Xiankong Temple, from the wilderness to Chaoyang City, then to the wilderness, and finally here. I'm really tired." Ning Ke wanted to say something, but was stopped by her. "You said something to me in Chaoyang City," said Sang Sang. "You said that the future is actually very similar to death. If it's already destined, then there's no point in worrying about it. If it can be changed, then there's even less need for us to worry. We just need to work hard to change it." Ning Ke said, "This is what the headmaster said." Sang Sang said, "The world is big, but there is really no place where I can live. We all know that the ending can't be changed, so why are we still worried? Death means that there is no future. When we can't change it, shouldn't we learn to accept it?" Ning Ke said with a smile, "That's very well said." Sang Sang lowered her head shyly. Ning Ke said, "I didn't expect Sang Sang to have the demeanor of a noble family now." Sang Sang said, "I'm just a little handmaiden." Ning Ke said, "Let's not mention that Grand Secretary Zeng Jing is the biological father of this body. You are the eldest daughter of a Yama family. Who in the world can be more noble than you?" Sang Sang didn't continue Ning Ke's joke because she knew that he said it to change the topic. She said, "I don't want to continue hiding." Ning Ke was silent for a long time and asked, "Why? Do you feel uneasy? Or do you feel like a rat crossing the street by hiding like this? I told you when you were young that as long as you can live, you should do whatever you want, no matter if you're a rat that everyone wants to kill or a poisonous snake that everyone fears." Sang Sang said, "I know that I can't live for a long time. In that case, why would I want to be a rat or a poisonous snake? If this is an uneasy conscience, then it is. Maybe we're destined to live such a hard life." "What's destined? Lucky chance?" The headmaster said that I am his lucky chance. "Then what is my lucky chance?" "Your lucky chance is, of course, me." "Don't joke. I don't know why, but I always feel that I should go to the south at this time." "You will die if you go to the south. You will die if you don't go." "That makes sense." Ning Ke was actually very clear that if Sang Sang appeared on the battlefield in the southern wilderness at this time, the most likely thing that would happen to her was not necessarily death, but probably something more terrible than death. He said, "It is said that you live lively and die alone. If you really want to die, you should indeed have a grand and lively ceremony. And if you go to the road of death, you may find a chance to live. Seeing that he agreed to her suggestion, Sang Sang laughed happily. Although she did not know the specific situation on the battlefield in the south, she could clearly feel from the atmosphere in the desolate man's tribe that the situation they were facing was getting more and more serious. Even the women in the tribe had begun to prepare leather armor and weapons, ready to join the battle at any time. According to Ning Kei's original plan, he would use the desolate man's tribe to block the Central Plains Coalition army for a period of time and see if Song Song's illness could get better. Then he would take Sang Sang to the cold region of the far north. Even if he had to be a savage by the hot sea, he could not let them be caught by the powerhouses of the Buddhism and Taoism sects. However, Song Song's illness did not get better. Instead, it became more and more serious. Especially when Sang Sang did not want to continue fleeing, then everything would be for naught. After making the decision, Song Song's spirit became slightly better, not knowing if it was because her spirit finally had a place to rest. She was not as lethargic and sleepy as before. The cold aura in her body was getting stronger and stronger, but she had some appetite. She only put down the bowl of meat porridge after eating more than half of it. Ning Kei boiled a large pot of hot water and bathed her. Sang Sang sat in the big pot, her body overflowing with cold aura. The firewood under the pot continued to burn, and Ning Kei added a fire talisman to ensure that the flame would not go out. If someone were to see this, they would definitely think that I'm going to stew you and eat you. Ning Kei rubbed her hair and said with a smile. Sang Sang smiled a little naively and said, "Smelly, not delicious." Ning Kei said, "My Sang Sang is the sweetest and most delicious." Sang Sang said, "But I haven't seen you really eat me." Ning Kei said with a smile, "Who asked you to always be so disappointing and always be sick?" Sang Sang raised her head and looked at him with wide eyes. She said seriously, "If you don't eat now, you really won't be able to." Ning Kei pressed her head down and said, "It's not like you don't know that I don't like to eat meat." Sang Sang felt wronged and said, "When we were young in the city of Wei, you ate all the meat. In Chang, and you like to stay by Sister Dewdrop's side. How can I tell that you don't like it?" Ning Kei was speechless and could only keep quiet. He picked up the towel and wrapped her up, carried her to the bed, and then carefully wiped the water that had condensed into ice beads on her body. Then he took out the Chinjinji Cosmetic Store's powder and applied it evenly on her face. Sang Sang looked at her pale face in the mirror and sighed. "I used to think that I was born dark, but then I became whiter and whiter after I got sick. Now I'm even darker. It's so troublesome." After applying the powder for her, Ning Kei began to draw her eyebrows. He said casually, "My Sang Sang can be black and white when she wants to be. She's really a little beauty who can look good with light or heavy makeup." Sang Sang said, "Ning Kei, you are getting more and more shameless now. You can tell such a big lie without changing your expression." Ning Kei looked at the clean little face in front of him. He looked at her eyebrows that were as black as ink and her short hair that was like grass leaves. He lowered his head and kissed her forehead, and then kissed her cool lips. He said, "You have always been beautiful." Sang Sang was a little shy, but she looked at him bravely and kissed him back. Ning Kei smiled and helped her put on her underwear. He stuck the fire talisman on her and put on a few thick cotton coats. He whistled to the outside of the tent and looked at her quietly. He asked, "Are we leaving now?" Sang Sang nodded and said yes. Ning Kei said, "Then let's go." They did not need any reason to leave. They just did not want to stay. Ning Kei and Sang Sang refused the desolate man's strong persuasion and even obstruction. They drove the black horse carriage to the south. They came here with so much difficulty and left so suddenly. It was just like when they waited for eldest brother in Chaoyang City for a whole winter and then parted when they saw each other. This behavior seemed a little ridiculous and almost like a child's play. But in fact, it was a helpless choice under an absolute predicament. It was fake elegance. Underneath, it was cold despair. No matter how big the world was, there was no place for them to stay. There was no direction and no end to escape, so it was meaningless. Sang Sang, who was seriously ill and on the verge of death, did not want to escape anymore. So Ning Ke did not escape either. So they went to the battlefield in the south with cold air. It was at the moment when they decided not to escape that they regained the meaning of freedom in the remaining time they had left in the human world. They were forced to flee for their lives over the past few days, and they were also forced to leave. In the war between light and darkness, everything they did was forced. Only at this moment, peacefully dying was the choice they made on their own initiative, because only death, which represented eternity, was higher than light and darkness. Sang Sang had already seen her ending and knew that she could not escape, so she was very calm. Ning Ke understood these things and saw through the truth. Or rather, he no longer held any hope for Sang Sang's illness. So he was no longer afraid or sad, and also began to calm down. The big black horse could not calm down. Its hooves stepped on the grass, and its nose smelled the fragrance of wildflowers. Its butt was padded with a few thick pieces of animal skin, but could not stop the cold air in the carriage. It had long lost feeling between its legs from the cold, and it was very frightened and uneasy. The black horse carriage left the desolate man's tribe. The thick dark clouds in the sky gradually moved, shrouding the wilderness in late spring and darkening the grass on the field. More than 10 black crows flew south with the carriage. They did not know if it was because the cold air in Sang Sang's body was getting more and more serious. So the temperature of the air had dropped a lot, and they became much quieter. I took advantage of yesterday's vacation to have a good sleep and adjusted my biological clock. I hope I can last longer this time. It's best if I can keep going. It's just that it's too easy to get sleepy when writing during the day. There will be updates at night, and please don't forget that there will be updates tomorrow. Have a good weekend. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Dian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 666. The black carriage traveled through the wilderness, and jackdaws flew in the dark grass. In the distant wilderness in front of them, sword lights occasionally flashed by, and chaotic clouds gradually broke into pieces. Ning Ke sensed the faint fluctuation of aura and put the fruit in front of Sang Sang's lips. He said, I have never seen such a violent fluctuation of the chi of heaven and earth. I wonder how many powerhouses are fighting there. In the White Tower Temple in Chaoyang City of Yueluan Kingdom, he had seen the battle between eldest brother and the chief preaching monk of Xiankang Temple. In that battle, eldest brother used the words of Confucius against the words of Buddha of the chief preaching monk. Both of them displayed a state that was almost miraculous. It was no weaker than the fluctuation of the chi of heaven and earth coming from the distant wilderness. However, neither eldest brother nor the chief preaching monk fought to the death that day. At this time, the storm-like change of the chi of heaven and earth that Ning Ke sensed was even more terrifying and shocking. I've seen it. Sang Sang took the fruit and took a bite. The color of the flesh changed slightly and was instantly frozen. When she chewed, there was a rustling sound, as if she was chewing on ice. Ning Ke asked curiously, Where have you seen such a battle? Sang Sang said, When a headmaster and master Yin Se fought on the north mountain of Chang, and the change of the chi of heaven and earth was also terrible. But they covered themselves at that time. Ning Ke took the frozen fruit and took a bite. His teeth didn't break, but he shivered because of the cold. He said with a smile, If we were still in Chang, and the neighbors on Lin 47th Street would no longer buy ice to pour well water on during the summer. They would stay in the old brush pen shop every day. Sang Sang smiled and then coughed twice. Since leaving the desolate man's tribe, she coughed less often. Maybe because she coughed too much in the past 2 years, she only coughed out a pure cold aura without phlegm or black blood. Sang Sang was very clean now. There was no dirty blood, sweat, or saliva. Her body was extremely pure inside and out, like transparent glass. In other words, she was becoming less and less like a human. Ning Ke held her in his arms and kissed her. Then he put his hand into her black fur coat and rubbed it. Although it was very cold, it was still very soft and warm. I never thought that I would marry a fairy, he said. Sang Sang looked up at him, flicked the frost off his eyelashes, and corrected him seriously. I'm not a fairy, I'm a monster. Ning Ke said, immortal? Monsters? You're Sang. Along the way to the south, the two chatted with each other. Occasionally, they would reminisce about Min Mountain, the city of Wei, and Chang. They did not talk about life and death, nor did they have any last words. Sang had said all her last words in the Hua Mountain Monastery. Ning Ke did not plan to live any longer. Even if he had any last words, there was no one to listen to them. Suddenly, a heavy object fell from the dark clouds, whistling through the air and smashing heavily onto the field several hundred feet in front of the black carriage, stirring up a clump of soil. When the carriage arrived, Ning Ke looked over and saw half a human corpse in a shallow pit in the field. Judging from his skin color and muscle strength, it should be a powerful, desolate man warrior. Ning Ke could not help but be shocked. He was very clear about the physical strength of the desolate man. The stronger the desolate man warrior, the stronger he was to resist knives and swords. However, this powerful desolate man warrior's body had been cut by a sword, and half of his corpse had been shaken to this place. One could imagine how fast the sword was and how powerful the owner of the sword was. It's a grand cultivator in the knowing destiny state. It seems that there are many powerhouses in the West Hill Divine Palace. Ning Ke said to Sang. After a while, the sound of something breaking through the air sounded again in the wilderness. But this time, the sound was not whistling like before, but shrill and much sharper. Ning Ke looked up warily and saw a bright sword flash, flying at high speed along the edge of the dark clouds. It did not stab the carriage, but stabbed diagonally into a slightly raised meadow in front of them on the right. The flying sword was so powerful that it pierced through the entire meadow and came out from the other side of the meadow, bringing with it a trail of black soil and grass. Then it landed on the ground. The bright sword suddenly dimmed, and it looked extremely defeated. This flying sword was so powerful that only a powerhouse who had entered the knowing destiny state could use it. Ning Ke looked at the flying sword behind the meadow and realized that there was a handle behind it. He suddenly realized that the owner of the sword was a powerhouse from the Sword Garret of South Jin Kingdom, and it was very likely that he was the powerhouse who had cut the desolate man warrior in half. A powerhouse from the Sword Garret of Knowing Destiny State had been defeated just like that. Ning Ke looked up at the battlefield in the south. He looked at the increasingly intense changes in the chi of heaven and earth, and the increasingly powerful sword light and talisman intent. His expression became more and more serious. The black horse carriage was still a long distance away from the battlefield, but he had already seen the two powerhouses leave. Then how many people were dying in the wilderness at every moment? Suddenly, a very thin, bright line flashed across Ning Ke's eyes, followed by countless others. He was looking at the battlefield in the south. The light reflected in his black eyes was naturally the scenery there. On the battlefield in the wilderness in the distance, lightning flashed and thunder roared. The lightning was not as powerful as the lightning in the real world, but it was very close to the ground. It flashed and teleported, as if it was chasing after someone. What kind of powerhouse could summon thunder and lightning? Ning Ke thought that if the lightning was chasing after him, he would have no way to deal with it. He could only be struck to death, and there were more than one or two powerhouses in that state in the wilderness. What could he change by bringing Sang there? Would they die peacefully, or would something else really happen as he had expected? Hundreds of thousands of people, as well as countless warhorses and chariots, appearing in one place at the same time would be a very terrifying thing. Neither Chang, and nor the West Hill Divine Palace could complete a military parade. However, in the vast and boundless wilderness, there was enough space even for a chaotic battle like this, not to mention a parade in formation. The new grass on the wilderness was drenched in blood and trampled by horses. It had to end its life prematurely. The grass roots were still there, but the greenery was gone. The soil on the surface of the wilderness turned into floating ash. The war between the Desolate Man and the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army had lasted for many days. Although they were called natural warriors and had many powerhouses, the Desolate Man's tribe still could not fight against the entire human world. They were at a disadvantage since the beginning of the war, and they kept losing and retreating. They were only holding on with the spirit and boldness that had been honed in the cold region of the far north for thousands of years. But everyone knew that the Desolate Man could not hold on for long. The war in the 18th year of the Tianqi era of the Tang Empire and the 3449th year of the Daji era of West Hill were very different from the countless wars in the past. In the past wars, cultivators had always played a supporting role. No matter array tactical masters, talisman masters, or those sword masters who were willing to carry out assassination missions, they could not decide the outcome of a war. But in this war, cultivators were very important. The reason for this was because this was a holy war initiated by the West Hill Divine Palace. Almost all the cultivators from the Central Plains had come to the wilderness. The difference in numbers led to a huge change in the pattern of war. Priests from the West Hill Divine Palace, Haotian Taoism cultivators from various Taoist temples, visiting professors from places like the Sword Garret of South Jin Kingdom and the Great River Black Ink Garden, rare talisman masters, and array tactical masters relied on by the armies of various countries had all participated in the war. On the battlefield in the wilderness, the chi of heaven and earth was controlled by countless psyche power, disturbed by countless fu papers, and shaken by countless tactical arrays. It was changing rapidly, and even the natural environment was changing drastically. In the wilderness in late spring, heavy rain, heavy snow, morning dew, and evening wind appeared from time to time and then disappeared. The battlefield was chaotic and danger was everywhere. If not for the Desolate Man's innately strong bodies and the powerful warrior leaders who had secretly learned the skills of the Devil's Doctrine, they would have collapsed under the first attack of the cultivators and cavalry from the Central Plains. Although the Desolate Man had managed to hold on, many of their warriors had died or been seriously injured in these battles. Of course, many more cavalrymen from the Central Plains had died under their axes, and many cultivators had been killed by the ordinary Desolate Man soldiers. In short, the battlefield in the wilderness was like a water wheel, constantly drawing water from the stream formed by humans to pour it into the wilderness. The only difference was that the water was human blood and flesh. The invisible water wheel of flesh and blood on the battlefield in the wilderness slowly came to a stop. Both sides temporarily retreated. The West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army and the cultivators returned to the camp wearily. The warriors of the Desolate Man's tribe, on the other hand, supported their weary bodies and walked in the wilderness, looking for the corpses of their fellow tribesmen and confirming their names. There was a giant chariot in the center of the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army. The giant chariot was 3 stories high, and its base was cast from a piece of bronze. The railings on the chariot were pure gold and shone with a holy light under the sunlight, as if it could steal all the light in the world. There was a tower on the chariot, and the curtains were tightly locked. One could not see what was inside the tower, but one could vaguely see an extremely tall figure. The tower on the chariot was the tallest in the entire wilderness. It was even higher than the meadow in the distance, and it even gave people the feeling that the tower on the chariot was higher than the goshawk flying in the sky. The person on the tallest chariot was naturally the tallest. The tall figure on the chariot was the hierarch lord of the West Hill Divine Palace. The most mysterious person in the cultivation world had always been the Devil's Doctrine suzerain, the 23-year cicada cultivation. But in fact, there was another saying that the most mysterious person was the hierarch lord of the West Hill Divine Palace. But no one dared to use the word mysterious to describe him. Even the mysterious legends about the hierarch lord had always been filled with a kind of reverence and admiration. The hierarch lord of the West Hill Divine Palace ruled Haotian Taoism and had the power to depose the emperors of the secular world. He enjoyed the worship of the world's believers with his supreme authority. In terms of power alone, he was even more powerful than the emperor of the Tang Empire. Few people had seen the true face of such a bigwig who stood at the peak of the world. The hierarch lord had never left Peach Mountain until he appeared in the wilderness. I'm very sleepy. I'll write 2 chapters today and make up for yesterday's 2 chapters tomorrow. Because I promised to write 3 chapters yesterday, I'll write 4 chapters the day after tomorrow on Sunday. I can't take a break, or else I won't be able to catch up. Please continue to support and urge me. I'll cast a monthly vote during the weekend. This is an entertainment activity. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to cast a recommendation vote or a monthly vote. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 667. About 10 miles to the east and west of the West Hill Divine Palace Hierarch's chariot, there were 2 other chariots. The one in the east was black and red, full of killing intent. It was the chariot of the great divine priest of judgment, Yi Hong Yu. An elder with deep wrinkles sat in the divine hall to the west. He was the great divine priest of revelation. Just as the black horse carriage drove out of the desolate man's tribe and headed south, the great divine priest of revelation, who had been silent since the start of the battle and had lowered his head to read the scriptures, suddenly raised his head and looked towards the north of the wilderness. He looked at the dark clouds on the horizon and said softly, "It's really dark." A moment later, the tall figure in the giant chariot shook slightly. He looked up at the dark clouds in the north and said in a low voice, "The night is coming soon. Why are you still hesitating?" The hierarch's tone was not very heavy, but his voice was extremely loud. It was like thunder that resounded around the gigantic divine carriage. The faces of the god officials and the experts beside the carriage suddenly paled. When they heard the contents of the hierarch's words and the hidden vigilance, their faces became even paler. On the battlefield in the wilderness, there were very few people who could see the black horse carriage in the distance like the great divine priest of revelation and the hierarch lord. However, as the black horse carriage moved, the dark clouds in the north moved south with it. It was extremely eye-catching. It did not take long for everyone to notice the cloud in the sky. Absolute silence fell on the 2 camps on the battlefield. Then, there was a loud cheer from the desolate man's side. The atmosphere on the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army's side became a little depressed. Some people had a look of fear on their faces. Because of this battle, the commander of the West Hill Divine Palace Divine Guards, Luo Kadi, left Yi Hong Yu's side and returned to the Hierarch Lord. He had been seriously injured by Ning Ke in Chaoyang City. However, it did not take long for his injuries to recover. It was probably because the Hierarch Lord had used his divine skills to heal him. Hearing the Hierarch Lord's thunderous order, Luo Kadi responded in a low voice. He waved the flag in his hand and gave the order to attack the Divine Hall Coalition Army, which stretched for more than 20 miles. The battle that had stopped for less than a moment had started again. Under the command of the general and the blessings of the red-robed priest, the exhausted Divine Hall Coalition Army seemed to have gained strength and courage in an instant. They roared and charged towards the desolate man's battlefront. Countless horse hooves trampled on the ground, causing smoke and dust to fly and the earth to shake. The desolate man warriors were also very tired. However, regardless of whether it was the middle-aged man with slightly white hair or the youthful youth, they all stood up and prepared to face the enemy. They did not shout like the Central Plains Coalition Army. There was no excitement on their faces either. They calmly and silently held the axes in their hands. The 2 sides finally met in the wilderness. The axe met the knife, the fist met the horse's head, the sword met the body, the talisman met the flying axe, and the blood met the blood. Countless heavy collisions sounded in the wilderness. Countless horses neighed and fell, and countless knights fell. When the desolate fell, countless sharp weapons slashed at them. Luo Kadi, who was serving beside the giant chariot, glanced at the tall figure in the tower out of the corner of his eye. He knew that the Hierarch Lord was very dissatisfied with the coalition army's progress. He gritted his teeth and roared. He led his divine guards and 1,000 powerful papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace towards the north. The 2,000 desolate man warriors who stayed behind the desolate man's tribe had not participated in the previous battles. They had been silently watching the movement in the direction of the giant chariot. Seeing that the West Hill Divine Palace had finally used the legendary papal cavalrymen, the desolate man warriors also began to move, with Tang Chong at the forefront. At this moment, dense hoofbeats sounded from the west of the wilderness. The hoofbeats were very heavy. One could imagine the extraordinary weight of the cavalrymen and the war horses. The hoofbeats were also very uniform. There was not a hint of chaos in the dense hoofbeats. It did not sound like a storm, but more like thousands of people beating drums at the same time. One could imagine the discipline and excellence of these cavalrymen. More than 10,000 Tang elite cavalrymen attacked again. In a very short period of time, the right side of the desolate man's battle line could not withstand the pressure and showed signs of collapse. Tang and the warrior leaders of the desolate man's tribe guessed why the Divine Hall Coalition army suddenly attacked them like crazy again. The black horse carriage was a variable. It might be meaningless, or it might directly change the situation on the battlefield. Therefore, they did not hesitate to face it and did not retreat. They were confident that they could withstand the attack of the Divine Hall Coalition army until the black horse carriage arrived. Although many people would definitely die, they felt danger when they saw more than 10,000 Tang cavalrymen begin to charge. However, the battlefield in the wilderness was in chaos. Tang and the most powerful warriors of the tribe could not support their people on the right side. Even if they rushed over, they could not defeat the 10,000 Tang cavalrymen who had already begun to charge. Therefore, they silently and valiantly continued to fight their way into the central region, hoping to dampen the morale of the Divine Hall Coalition army. It would be best if they could annihilate the legendary papal cavalrymen. If they could do this, they might even win a turning point in this battle that was bound to be lost. At least, they could delay the tragic moment of the desolate man being exterminated. In the center of the Divine Hall Coalition army was the army of the South Jin Kingdom. The South Jin Kingdom had always been regarded as the second most powerful country in the world. The South Jin Kingdom cavalry also boasted that they were the second most powerful army in the world. It was not until they came to the wilderness and began to fight with the desolate man that they realized how shameful their boasting was. At this time, they were facing the strong attack of more than 2,000 desolate man soldiers. The formation was suddenly in chaos, and a few cultivators were even trampled to death. Cheng Ziqing, a powerhouse from the sword garret of the South Jin Kingdom, wore an ordinary South Jin cavalry uniform. He rode on horseback and waved the sword in his hand to kill left and right. However, his eyes were fixed on a powerful leader of the desolate man dozens of feet away. The powerful leader of the desolate man was very powerful. 3 disciples of the sword garret had already been killed by him. At least 10 cavalrymen from the South Jin Kingdom had been knocked down by something that looked like an iron rod. At this time, the situation of the cavalry of the South Jin Kingdom was very bad. If the leader of the desolate man was allowed to rush over, it would definitely cause panic. Once the center of the desolate man was broken, the desolate man would be able to face the papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace. Looking at the momentum of the desolate man, the other party's goal was to eat the 1,000 papal cavalrymen alive. Cheng Ziqing's face suddenly turned pale. An extremely calm sword style seeped out from the ordinary military uniform he was wearing. The sword left his hand and turned into a long rainbow, piercing towards the leader of the desolate man. With a sharp sound, the flying sword, which contained his lifetime's cultivation, cut through the abdomen of the leader of the desolate man. Blood sprayed like rain, but the momentum of the sword was not over. The hilt carried the lower half of the leader of the desolate man's corpse and flew diagonally towards the back of the wilderness. A few desolate men looked sorrowful and flew towards Cheng Ziqing. Cheng Ziqing's expression did not change. Using his finger as a sword, he easily knocked down the desolate men. As a powerhouse from the sword garret of the South Jin Kingdom, his cultivation state was only below that of the Sage of Sword, Liu Bai. He was a grand cultivator in the middle of the knowing destiny state. Ordinary desolate men were no match for him. In the previous battle, he had kept a low profile and endured just to complete this shocking attack. Now that he had achieved his goal, he naturally would not continue fighting. No matter how strong a cultivator was, his body was still fragile. In this battlefield filled with flying axes and arrows and the vibrations of the chi of heaven and earth, he could die at any time due to unknown reasons. Moreover, He urgently needed to meditate and recuperate after using the strongest sword of his life. Cheng Ziqing raised his hand to the sky and wanted to take back his flying sword. However, at this moment, he heard the sound of feet hitting the ground from afar. His expression suddenly changed. The soles of the feet hit the ground like drums. The person was fast, but the fist was even faster. A terrifying and scorching fist style hit Cheng Ziqing's face from dozens of feet away. At this moment, Cheng Ziqing's psyche power was exhausted and his body was exhausted. His natal sword had flown for miles, and he had no way to defend against this terrifying fist style. He could only wait for death. With a crisp crack, a bolt of thunder exploded in front of him. The fist style collided with the thunder, and an extremely strong wave of the chi of heaven and earth erupted. Cheng Ziqing's warhorse was directly shaken to death. His body was also shaken to the side and flew backward, falling heavily to the ground. With a puff, Cheng Ziqing's face turned pale, and he could not stop vomiting blood. With the help of the thunder, he had luckily avoided the terrifying fist style. However, he was still seriously injured by the chi of heaven and earth when the two collided. The most serious thing was that he had lost contact with his own natal sword. This powerhouse from the sword garret of South Jin Kingdom had his natal sword destroyed by Ning Kei's arrow in the Lang Temple the year before last. With the help of his senior brother, Liu Bai, he had managed to refine a second natal sword, which was more powerful than before. Now that it was destroyed again, the damage to him was even more terrifying. After the first thunder, there was a second. The sound of thunder kept ringing in the wilderness, and the extremely thin lightning illuminated the smoke and dust. The lightning did not come from high up in the sky, but from a space about 100 feet above the ground of the wilderness. It suddenly appeared and then suddenly fell. The power of these lightning was not as terrifying as the real lightning in the natural world. However, if it fell on a human body, it would still cause terrifying damage. Even the strongest desolate man warrior would be turned into ashes under one blow. However, the strange thing was that the lightning that was born in the void did not strike the desolate man warriors everywhere on the battlefield. Instead, it disappeared and appeared from time to time, as if it was chasing after someone, like a sword with a spirit. There was a kind of goshawk that built its nest on the ground in the wilderness. One goshawk's nest had long been trampled into ruins by countless horse hooves. The goshawk fluttered in the air in fear. It was reluctant to leave, but there was nothing it could do. When the lightning sounded, it finally could not bear the instinctive fear. It could no longer care about the young goshawk in its nest. It cried out and flew higher into the sky. The goshawk did not dare to fly north because there was a dark cloud in the north. It could only fly up and south. The higher it flew, the smaller the people on the ground of the wilderness became. Gradually, they became densely packed ants. If the sky had eyes, the humans who were risking their lives and killing in the wilderness would probably be a black dot smaller than an ant. It might be confused or laugh at what it saw. I'm still so sleepy. I'm going out now. There will be updates at night. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 668. No one knew whether Hao Ian would laugh when humans were thinking, and no one knew whether Hao Ian would laugh when humans were fighting. However, thinking or fighting was ultimately the business of humans. Whether Hao Ian would laugh or not, humans would continue to do it, either thinking hard or fighting with their lives on the line. The goshawk flew away and the dark clouds approached. The war on the wilderness continued. Every moment, there were people falling, swords breaking, and blood gushing out. The smoke and dust gradually dissipated, but no one knew if it was because the cavalry could not charge at high speed or because the ground was soaked in blood and covered with corpses. In the middle of the battlefield, the powerful desolate warriors kept charging forward. They had already torn a huge gap in the cavalry of the South Jin Kingdom. Even the legendary papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace were a little unstable due to their charge. Of course, they also paid a terrible price for it. Many desolate warriors fell on the path of the charge. His leather clothes trembled in the bloody wind, and then he dragged out several shadows. Tang, who was bathed in blood, was like a burning stone. He ran amok on the battlefield, sending more than 10 war horses flying. He tore several priests of the West Hill Divine Palace to pieces with his bare hands, and then he finally arrived in front of Luo Kadi. Blood flowed down from Tang's body like a waterfall. It was the enemy's, not his. The internal organs of a priest hung on his shoulder. The scene was extremely bloody. Luo Kadi knew who he was. His face suddenly turned pale, and fear took over his body and mind. He instinctively wanted to dodge or escape, but he knew that if he dodged or turned to escape, he would be smashed into pieces by Tang's fist the next moment. Even if he was lucky to survive, the Hierarch Lord would give him a more tragic ending. With a loud roar, Luo Kadi waved the god-given blade and chopped down at Tang's head. The blade whistled in the air, and the golden talisman lines on the blade suddenly lit up, and its power suddenly increased. Tang looked at the descending saber expressionlessly. He threw out a straight punch. His mountain-like fist smashed onto the blade of Luo Kadi's saber. The edge of the saber cracked, and then the hilt of the saber cracked. The web between Luo Kadi's thumb and index finger, which was holding onto the hilt of the saber, split open. Then that frighteningly huge force followed along his arm and attacked upwards. His shoulder blade broke with a cracking sound. Luo Kadi spat out a mouthful of fresh blood and fell backwards. His left hand turned into a saber and fiercely chopped at his own shoulder. He forcefully used his strength to cut off the invasion of that force. Only then did he luckily survive. The moment he landed on the ground, Tang's body leaped into the air and stepped on his head. Looking at the bloodied soul that was getting closer and closer, Luo Kadi's eyes revealed a look of despair. His current emotions were similar to Cheng Ziqing's when he sensed the terrifying and blazing fist intent. However, just like Cheng Ziqing, at the moment before death, a bolt of lightning saved his life. The lightning in the low altitude of the wilderness had been chasing Tang's figure for a long time, but they were unable to catch up. However, at the moment when Tang seriously injured Luo Kadi, they finally caught up. Tang stomped heavily on the ground and forced the lightning into the ground. The ground of the wilderness, which had been moistened by blood for a long time, shook. Between the broken grass and branches, a lot of blood actually squeezed out. There was a flash of lightning, and within it, a sword appeared quietly and pierced Tang's abdomen. Tang was the wayfarer of the Devil's Doctrine. He might even be the last wayfarer of the Devil's Doctrine. He was very powerful. Whether it was the expert from the Sword Garret, Cheng Ziqing, or Luo Kadi, there were no match for him. In this world, it was very difficult for a sword to pierce his body. However, at this moment, he was pierced. Even if he was pierced with the strength of Tang's body, it would be difficult for a sword to pierce his body. However, this sword pierced his body, and it was very deep. Blood seeped from the edge of the sword. It was not an extremely sharp sword, nor was it the unparalleled sword beside the quiet pool in the Sword Garret. It was just a thin wooden sword. The wooden sword was exactly the same as it had been more than a decade ago, except that there was an additional hilt. The person holding the hilt of the wooden sword was, of course, Yi Su. Tang was the world wayfarer of the Devil's Doctrine, while Yi Su was the world wayfarer of Haotian Taoism. The two of them were like two sides of the world. One day, they would definitely meet and then fight to the death. They were all people at the peak of the world, and each had their own pride. Yi Su faced Jun Mo of the Academy in the Lang Temple. When Jun Mo turned around, he turned around. In today's battle in the wilderness, he also did not bother to kill the ordinary desolate soldiers. Instead, he focused his spirit on Tang alone. Of course, there was no absolute fairness. Other than avoiding Yi Su's sword, Tang also had to protect his own people and fight against the powerhouses of Haotian Taoism. More importantly, he had led the Desolate Man tribe to fight against the people of the Central Plains in the wilderness for many days. More accurately, he had been fighting for several years. Yi Su, who had been cultivating his spirit for a long time and was at his peak, faced the exhausted Tang. The result of this battle was not difficult to imagine. The wooden sword pierced deeply into Tang's abdomen, and then there was a thunderous sound. A bright red wound opened up in Tang's abdomen. Blood flowed from his eyes, mouth, and nose. This time, it was not the blood of the enemy, but his own blood. As soon as they met, Tang was seriously injured. However, there was still no expression on his face, much less any fear. His legs suddenly burst into flames. The bright red flames were like magma in a volcano, blazing hot and heavy. His right leg left the ground at a very strange angle, and then kicked downwards. He was clearly standing on the ground, and his right leg was clearly raised to half a person's height. However, when his right leg fell downwards, the foot in the leather boot seemed to step down from the sky. There was a crisp sound. Tang's right foot stepped hard on the wooden sword, and it broke in the middle. The wooden sword was now deeply embedded in his abdomen. Tang's right foot stepping on the broken wooden sword was equivalent to hitting his own abdomen, stirring up his internal organs. However, there was still no expression on his face. Isu's face was slightly pale. His right hand released the hilt of the sword, and he did not hesitate to abandon the sword. His thin Taoist robe danced in the wind of the wilderness. An extremely ethereal chi of heaven and earth attacked him, and he retreated 100 feet with the wind. Tang's mountain-like right fist was already clenched tightly, hanging by his waist. He was about to strike, but he did not, because Yisu's figure was no longer in front of him. Even if he struck, he would only hit empty air. Blood kept gushing out, and Tang's face finally revealed a trace of exhaustion. Then he reached out to pull out half of the wooden sword from his abdomen and slowly knelt down on one knee, panting deeply. The top master of the desolate man, Tang, had been seriously injured by Yisu, the world wayfarer of Haotian Taoism. At this point in the war on the wilderness, it seemed that the outcome could finally be seen clearly. The sounds of killing on the battlefield gradually subsided. The desperate advance of the desolate man was finally stopped by the cavalry of the South Jin Kingdom and the papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace. However, the charge of more than 10,000 cavalrymen of the Tang Empire in the west was unstoppable. Just before the desolate man's tribe faced the disaster of extinction, a low and orderly chanting of sutras sounded. The desolate man soldiers who were seriously injured and could no longer fight began to chant a sutra with several senior statesmen. The sutra was not long, but the syllables were very complicated. It was obviously not the commonly used Central Plains characters, which the desolate man also used. It was more like the primitive characters of the west of the Yueluan Kingdom. The desolate man soldiers and the leading statesmen did not know that the sutra came from the legendary Ming hand scroll of the Tomes of Arcane. As the sound of the sutra reverberated in the wilderness, a faintly discernible aura began to appear on the battlefield. This aura was extremely compassionate and abnormally quiet, as if it came from the blood and the twisted or broken corpses on the battlefield. It clearly showed the meaning of death and reincarnation. The great statesman of the desolate man's tribe stood up with difficulty with the help of a young man. He looked at Tang, who was kneeling on one knee in the middle of the battlefield, and a trace of determination appeared in the deep wrinkles on his face. The great elder also began to chant the same scripture. His voice was very hoarse, but it was also extremely loud and clear. It was like the wind that blew across the wasteland, almost like a shout. In the center of the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army, the tall figure standing on the platform of the giant chariot froze slightly. The hierarch Lord listened to the sutra chanting in the wilderness and the shouting of the desolate statesman. He silently thought that if the monks of the Xiankong Temple had not disobeyed the order and refused to come to the wilderness to help, he would not even have the chance to fight for his life. The Buddhism Vedanta of the Xiankong Temple was not here, so someone needed to fight with the desolate statesman spiritually. Otherwise, if the old man's almost shouting sutra continued on the battlefield, both the Central Plains Coalition Army and the papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace would pay a terrible price. In the face of the desolate statesman's chanting, even the tall figure on the giant chariot could only protect himself. Then who was qualified to fight with his life? In the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army, Only the old man was qualified. The wrinkles on the great divine priest of Revelation's face deepened. He listened to the sutra chanting from the far north and the shouting of the old man. He calmly said, "The heavenly mandate begins with darkness, the beginning of light." Then he continued, "The heavenly mandate begins with sacrifice, the beginning of good." Finally, he said, "The heavenly mandate begins with light, the beginning of man." After saying these 3 sentences, the wrinkles on the great divine priest of Revelation's face seemed to be carved into his cheeks, flesh, and even bones. 2 extremely thick streams of blood flowed out from the corners of his eyes. Around the great divine priest of Revelation's divine chariot, the faces of the 7 priests in red were already withered. Their black hair suddenly turned white, and they aged a few hundred years in an instant. They had long stopped breathing. The desolate statesman slowly closed his eyes and fell backward. The young desolate man warrior who was supporting him did not know what had happened. He held his body in sorrow and was speechless. The wounded, desolate men around him struggled to stand up and then knelt down. The great statesman's mental strength was very strong. Compared to the great divine priest of Revelation, who had the strongest mental strength in the West Hill Divine Palace, there was still a small gap. So in the end, he died. This was a battle that seemed simple, but was actually extremely dangerous. The great divine priest of Revelation finally used up the lifespan of 7 red-robed priests to win, and the desolate great elder did not make use of any of the desolate men until his death. In this sense, no one knew who was stronger. Chapter 4 tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 669. As for the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army, the Emperor of the South Jin Kingdom stayed in capital Chung. The South Jin Kingdom troops that entered the wilderness were personally led by the Crown Prince of the South Jin Kingdom. In the previous bloody battle, they had suffered heavy losses. Countless powerhouses from the Sword Garret had died, and the great divine priest of Revelation had been seriously injured. However, the true strength of the Allied forces was not affected much. There were also many foreign ministers of Taoism, like the Black Ink Garden of the Great River Kingdom, who were silent and waiting. The great divine priest of judgment, Yi Hongyu, who was in the blood-colored divine chariot, had yet to fight today. She had killed 3 leaders of the Desolate Man warriors in the battle a few days ago, showing her terrifying power. One must know that the power of the leaders of the Desolate Man warriors was close to the peak of martial arts. The hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace stayed in the huge divine chariot. The cavalry of the Tang Empire did not show their full strength during the several charges. The senior statesmen of the Desolate Man's tribe were either dead or injured. The first elder was killed on the spot, and the number 1 master, Tang, was seriously injured. More than a dozen powerful warrior leaders were either injured or dead. At this time, the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army still had such a powerful force and so many backup plans. How could the Desolate Man not be desperate? The battle gradually stopped, but not for long. The Divine Hall Coalition Army sounded the drums again, and the army gathered again, ready to launch the last attack on the Desolate Man's tribe in the north. Tens of thousands of desolate warriors had suffered heavy casualties. Due to their strong bodies and willpower, most of them were seriously injured and no longer had the ability to fight. The clansmen looked at Tang, who was kneeling on one knee in the middle of the battlefield in the wilderness. They knew that the moment of annihilation was finally coming. The hard struggle and dreams of the past 1,000 years would finally come to nothing. There was a dead silence in the wilderness. Then someone started to sing. The sad ballad floated in the wind, and the rough singing echoed in the wilderness. The sky is cold, the earth is cold. The goshawk does not dare to look at the north. The hot sea falls, the hot sea rises. Snow wolves are hunted by the hot sea. The snow wolf chases, the snow wolf dies. Holding a knife, I search for the deer all day long. Where to live, where to die, where to bury the white bones. Min Mountain is majestic. Min Mountain is magnificent. Min Mountain is the true hometown. Treading the boundless snow, trampling through 10,000 miles of frost, gazing south all day long, treading the boundless snow, trampling through 10,000 miles of frost, no longer looking south. I'll go first, you can come after me. I'll fight first, then you. I'll die first, then you. The homeward journey is short, but the homeward journey is long. Let's embark on the homeward journey. I'm already gone. Come quickly. I'm already fighting. Come quickly. I'm already dead. Come quickly. I'm already dead. Come quickly. This was the hometown song of the desolate man's tribe that had been passed down for thousands of years. After thousands of years of wind and snow, they finally left the cold region of the far north, the hot sea, and the snowfield, and returned to their homeland. However, what greeted them was not flowers and enthusiasm, but cold eyes, bloody fights, and the tragic fate of the extinction of their entire clan. In the past, when the desolate man sang this song, there would be a solemn and stirring emotion, or even a solemn but not sad calmness. However, today, tens of thousands of desolate man soldiers were either dead or injured. They sat on the field with pools of blood, and their voices were hoarse or hoarse. The singing could not be orderly, rising and falling from time to time, making it seem especially sorrowful and soaring into the sky. Suddenly, there was the sound of horses' hooves, followed by the sound of wheels. The sound of wheels blended into the sad song of the desolate man. The rhythm of the song was not disrupted. The desolate man's song had no rhythm at this time. Instead, it was given a certain rhythm, a calm, stable, and indifferent rhythm. Clouds covered the northern sky of the field, and a black horse carriage slowly came under the clouds. The desolate man looked at the horse carriage and helped each other to stand up with difficulty. Whether it was the gray-haired old soldiers, the green-faced young soldiers, the middle-aged men with broken legs, or the blood-covered women, they all looked at the black horse carriage with awe and fear. Then there was their last hope. Their proud knees landed on the blood-soaked field. Wherever the black horse carriage passed, the desolate man knelt down and kowtowed. Some of the seriously injured desolate man soldiers could no longer stand up once they knelt down and died. Tang knelt on one knee in the middle of the battlefield in the wilderness. His left knee sank deep into the mud, squeezing out a lot of black liquid. It was unknown whether it was the blood of the wilderness or the blood of his fellow tribesmen. He stared silently at the huge, sacred chariot in the distance, and at the looming tall figure in the tower. He slowly adjusted his breath. The desolate man was facing extinction. As the world wayfarer of the devil's doctrine and the leader of the desolate man, he was unwilling to accept this fact. At least before he died, he wanted the West Hill Divine Palace to pay a painful price. In the wilderness at this time, the most honorable and important person to the Central Plains countries was naturally the hierarch lord of the West Hill Divine Palace in the huge sacred chariot. He was the ultimate goal of Tang's life. At this moment, he heard the slightly disorderly singing of his tribesmen coming from afar. Then he heard the sound of hooves and wheels. He looked back and saw the black horse carriage. The surface of the black horse carriage was covered with a thin layer of frost, and the inside of the carriage was covered with a thick layer of ice. The talisman fire in the brass basin was frozen like a ghost fire by the cold and could be extinguished at any time. The cold aura in Song Song's body had long been awakened, and now it finally began to erupt. However, neither she nor Ning Kei knew what the imprint of Yama in her body would eventually evolve into. Ning Kei's eyelashes were covered with frost, and the dim light coming in through the window was refracted into colorful light by the frost. He listened to the song of the desolate man outside the window and said, "I'll go first, and then you." Sang Sang nodded and put her face on his chest. She said, "I'll die first, and then you." Ning Kei shook his head and said, "I'll die first, and then you. Or we'll die together." When the black horse carriage appeared in the wilderness, the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition army fell into silence. The armies that were gathering became a little chaotic, and the powerful cultivators with terrifying states were silent. 2 years ago, when the Lank Temple's light of Buddha shone brightly, the entire human world had been chasing after the black horse carriage. The extremely tragic war on the wasteland had all been caused by the Black Horse carriage. However, the Black Horse carriage had finally appeared in front of everyone today, and everyone felt a little helpless. No one gave any orders. The tall figure on the giant chariot looked up in silence. The West Hill Divine Palace Coalition army almost subconsciously stopped attacking and waited for the final military order. The Black Horse carriage stopped in front of the desolate man. There was a soft creak, and the snow on the carriage shook and peeled off. The carriage door opened, and Sang, who was wearing a black fur coat, walked out. She looked at the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition army in the south and took a few steps forward. Every time she took a step, the place where her feet touched the ground of the wilderness would be frozen, forming a ball of ice and snow. It was as if she was walking on a white snow lotus. Dark clouds covered most of the sky in the wilderness. More than a dozen black crows flew and circled above Song's head. The scene was extremely strange. Looking at this scene, everyone in the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition army in the south felt extremely strange. It was a combination of negative emotions of fear, awe, disgust, and destruction. In the blood-red chariot, Yi Hongyu rested her chin on her hand and looked at the north quietly. She looked a little tired. Unlike the ordinary soldiers, she was not shocked by the Black Horse carriage and the daughter of Yama. She was just confused at this moment. Where was Ning Ke? Suddenly, her eyes lit up. Her black hair, which was like a waterfall, fluttered behind her. Without hesitation, she bent her waist and fell down like a tree that had been cut down along with her wildly dancing black hair. Ning Ke was not by Song's side, nor was he in the Black Horse carriage. No one knew when he had left the horse carriage. Under the cover of the Desolate song, he came to the front of the Desolate's battle line, and came to the Desolate who were kneeling on the ground in reverence. When the whole world's attention was attracted by Sang, he knelt on the ground on one knee and pulled the string with his right hand. The iron bow suddenly bent, and he aimed in the direction of the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition army a few miles away in the south. The primordial 13 arrows were a combination of the collective wisdom of the Academy and the resources of the entire Tang Empire. In terms of power, it could even be compared with the legendary previous generation's magic weapons. The primordial 13 arrows could ignore space. No matter how far it flew, its power would not be reduced. Therefore, in a battle, the further away from the enemy, the better it was for Ning Quebec. Because it was difficult for the enemy to predict from his movements and eyes, and they would not be alerted. Because of these characteristics, the primordial 13 arrows were the most suitable weapon for sneak attacks on the battlefield. It could be said that they were always successful. The only limitation was whether Ning Ke could see and aim at the target. At this time, the two armies were separated by a few miles. Ordinary arrows and flying swords could not fly over, but Ning Ke could clearly see all the details of the battle line that stretched for more than 20 miles, and he could aim at whoever he wanted. Shing, shing, shing. Ning Ke knelt on one knee and hit among the desolate. He moved continuously and shot 5 arrows at lightning speed. He knew that there were not many opportunities left for him today. He had to seize and make full use of this opportunity, which meant that he had to kill enough targets in the first attack. The first arrow was the most unexpected and the most difficult to guard against. It had the highest chance of success. Of course, the target chosen was the most important person, the one who could most likely cause a fundamental change in the battle. This target was easy to choose. Just as Tang decided to kill that person at the cost of his life, Ning Ke did not hesitate to choose to shoot the first arrow at the hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace. Everything was as Ning Ke had expected. The battlefield was far away, different from the battles in the Lang Temple and Chaoyang City with the primordial 13 arrows. No one could predict his actions in advance. At least when the first sound of the string reverberated in the wilderness, no one knew that the iron arrow had left the string. The primordial 13 arrows ignored time and space, so logically, no one could avoid it. Not even the hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace. A white turbulence suddenly appeared behind the string. Before it was completely formed, the dark iron arrow had already disappeared. In the next moment, It appeared on the huge divine chariot in the south, in the pavilion behind thousands of layers of gauze curtains, and shot the head of the tall figure. The gauze curtains covered the clear light. The iron arrow shot the head of the figure, but it seemed as if it had shot a real shadow. It silently passed through, and then the iron arrow itself appeared. It passed through countless layers of curtains and disappeared in the distant sky in the south. The tall figure leaned forward slightly and looked toward the north of the wilderness. It seemed that he was not hurt, but rather found it very interesting. He wanted to see what the person who shot the arrow looked like. Today is the first chapter, and there are 3 more chapters to go. If you like this work, please come Achidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 670. Ninkei did not feel frustrated when the first arrow that seemed to be about to succeed failed. He looked calm as if he had already expected it. The white turbulence around the bowstring did not dissipate, and the next 4 arrows shot out like lightning. The hierarch lord of the West Hill Divine Palace was not that easy to deal with. If he was killed by 1 arrow on the battlefield, then the legends in the West Hill scriptures would become a joke. According to the rules of the battlefield, Ninkei should not waste the precious opportunity of the first arrow on the hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace, since he was not confident. However, today's battlefield was different from ordinary ones. If he could not kill the hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace, then no matter how many people he killed, he would not be able to change the current situation. Moreover, no one could resist the strong temptation of shooting the hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace to death. He would not give up without trying. Ninkei's choice of target order was very normal. The stronger or more threatening the person, the higher he would choose. The first arrow was shot at the hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace, and the second was naturally Yi Hongyu. In the blood-red divine chariot, Yi Hongyu's black hair was like an arrow, and her body was like a broken arrow. She bent backward and fell. At this time, the iron arrow had arrived. With a whistle, the divine chariot's curtain was blown into countless pieces. Several strands of black hair fell, and a stream of blood flowed down from her forehead. Yi Hongyu lay on the floor of the divine chariot, and her blood-red, divine robe of judgment spread out like the sunset clouds. It should have been a beautiful scene, but she looked extremely embarrassed. No matter how pathetic she was, she still managed to survive. However, when she thought about the iron arrow that was so close to her forehead and how close she was to death, even she turned pale. Ninkei's third arrow was shot at the great divine priest of Revelation. The great divine priest of Revelation had previously fought with the desolate man's psyche and won. He had also paid a great price and was now meditating in the divine chariot, trying to recover as soon as possible. At this time, the hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace finally had time to react. The tall figure in the huge divine chariot suddenly straightened his back, and a thunderous roar rang through the wilderness. A thunderous sound exploded in front of the great divine priest of Revelation's divine chariot. It looked like a lightning bolt, and countless extremely thin white electric threads kept rolling, as if they could devour everything that entered the lightning ball. The iron arrow shot into the ball of lightning and gradually peeled off. Then it became thinner, but in the end, it wasn't completely swallowed. It turned into a slender shadow that broke through the lightning and shot into the divine carriage. The iron arrow was weakened by the West Hill Divine Palace's hierarch, Lei Tuan, and its power was greatly reduced. The great divine priest of Revelation stretched out his right hand and gently caught the iron arrow in front of his face. His movement was very gentle, like using chopsticks to pick up vegetables or like using noodles to touch the sun. However, his expression was not relaxed. The deep wrinkles on his face deepened again, and the corners of his eyes began to bleed. Finally, even the wrinkles began to bleed. Only then did the iron arrow between his fingers calm down. The great divine priest of Revelation's meditation recovery was forcibly interrupted by the primordial 13 arrows. After being seriously injured, he would not be able to fight again in a short period of time. He could not participate in today's final battle. Ninkei's third arrow had perfectly achieved his battle intention. But no one would have thought that his third arrow had a more important purpose, which was to cover for the fourth arrow. His fourth arrow was once again shot towards the middle of the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army's battle line. The arrow cluster was not aimed at the huge divine chariot where the West Hill Divine Palace hierarch was standing, but at Luo Kadi, who was beside it. In Chaoyang City, Luo Kadi had been seriously injured by his arrow, and his throat was cut. He did not know how this person survived, and could even recover his strength and cultivation. Perhaps the West Hill Divine Palace had some secret divine skill, but he decided that he would not give the West Hill Divine Palace any chance to heal this person today. The West Hill Divine Palace hierarch blocked an arrow for the great divine priest of Revelation and did not have time to care about the arrow that was shot towards Luo Kadi. No matter how strong he was still a human after all, and there were things that he could not do. The iron arrow accurately hit Luo Kadi's throat, like a thread in a young girl's hand passing through the eye of a needle. It was easy, casual, and with a very comfortable pleasure. Blood splattered slightly, and the iron arrow disappeared from the wilderness. The neck bone turned into powder, and the flesh and blood became foam. Luo Kadi's eyes were a little confused. He did not know what had happened. He wanted to look at his throat that had been through many hardships, and was worried that he would never be able to speak again. He lowered his head, and his head fell. His body was as burly as a mountain. His head fell like a stone rolling down from the top of a mountain. It fell to the ground with a muffled thud. The divine guards of the West Hill Divine Palace surrounded Luo Kadi's corpse. Their eyes were filled with intense fear and endless sorrow as they watched their Lord Commander's inexplicable decapitation and death. At this moment, there was suddenly an earth-shattering scream and wail from not far away. They looked back in shock and saw that the South Jin Kingdom's military camp was in chaos. They did not know what had happened. There was a large pool of blood on the ground of the South Jin Kingdom's military camp. In the blood, there were pieces of flesh that had been shaken into pieces, and there was also half a corpse. Looking at the pair of golden silk cloud boots on his feet, he should be a member of the royal family. Several eunuchs and a few masters from the sword garret of South Jin Kingdom looked at the pool of flesh with pale faces. They trembled in shock and fear, and one eunuch even fainted from crying. Your Highness! Your Highness! A general of the South Jin Kingdom knelt beside the pool of flesh. His face was pale, and his eyes were filled with terror. It was as if he was scared out of his wits, and he kept shouting, trying to revive the pool of flesh. If the pool of flesh could not be revived, then the general of the South Jin Kingdom would definitely die. Countless soldiers and eunuchs of the South Jin Kingdom in the wilderness today would become a pool of flesh in the near future. This was Ning Kei's fifth arrow. The crown prince of the South Jin Kingdom, who had led the army on behalf of His Majesty, had died decisively. There was dead silence in the wilderness. No matter if it was the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army or the Desolate Man's tribe, no one spoke during this short period of time. Everyone was so shocked that they could not speak, and some even lost their souls, seeing that the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army was about to win, and as long as they rode forward, they would be able to cut off all the heads of the Desolate Man and exterminate the entire tribe. At this moment, 5 iron arrows flew from the wilderness. 5 arrows shot at 5 people. The hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace, the 2 great divine priests of West Hill, the commander of the Divine Hall's Divine Guards, Luo Kadi, and the crown prince of the South Jin Kingdom. Any one of them was the most important person in the world, especially the 4 other than Luo Kadi. Whether it was in terms of reputation, power, or actual power, they were all like emperors. The hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace and the 2 great divine priests of West Hill were even more godlike. Over the years, who had dared to attack these 5 people at the same time? If anyone had heard of such a situation in the past, they would have thought that the person was not sane. However, the final result of these 5 arrows was that the great divine priest of Revelation was seriously injured and could no longer fight. This meant that he was forced to leave today's battle. The great divine priest of Judgment was extremely disheveled and only managed to escape with great difficulty. Luo Kadi and the crown prince of the South Jin kingdom died. Ning-Ke did not only care about the target's power, but also from a strategic point of view. The key was that he had the ability to carry out such a strategy. Luo Kadi was the most trusted subordinate of the West Hill Divine Palace hierarch. He represented the direct power that was loyal to the hierarch. Such a tragic death would definitely make those powers uneasy, and they might even have other ideas. The South Jin Kingdom Army was one of the main forces of the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army. They had always been by the hierarch side. The death of the crown prince of the South Jin Kingdom, who was the commander of the army, would definitely bring great chaos to the South Jin Kingdom Army. It would greatly impact the morale of the generals and cavalrymen, and the combat power of the South Jin Kingdom Army would plummet. If his first arrow had really been able to kill the hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace, even if it was just a serious injury, the direction of today's battle could have been decisively changed because of these 5 iron arrows. Purely from a strategic point of view, the generals of the Tang Empire's Iron Cavalry and the Great River Kingdom Sage of Calligrapher, who had the highest cultivation state in the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army, seemed to be more qualified to be the Iron Arrow's targets than Luo Kadi and the Crown Prince of the South Jin Kingdom. However, for some reason, Ning-Ke did not choose to do so. Somewhere in the east of the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army, the disciples of the Great River Kingdom's Black Ink Garden had very complicated expressions on their faces. Zhuozhihua looked at her teacher's broad back and wanted to say something, but she did not say anything in the end. The master of calligraphy looked at the north silently and frowned slightly. He and the disciples of the Black Ink Garden had all seen the 5 iron arrows and the terrible damage caused by the iron arrows. Even though he had been in the knowing destiny state for many years, he could not be sure what the result would be if the iron arrows were shot at him. Moreover, no matter how humble he was, he knew that in the current coalition army, he should have a share of the iron arrows no matter what. There was only one reason why Ning-Ke did not shoot him. Catgirl's left shoulder was injured and wrapped in bandages. Her innocent and cute little face was extremely pale. She said with a sobbing tone, "Are we really going to fight with Brother Ning?" In the west of the wilderness, in front of the Tang army, General Xian Zhilong, who had taken over Xiaoho's position for 2 years, looked at the desolate man's tribe in the north that was almost completely dead. He wanted to find Ning-Ke's figure, but he could not find him. After a long silence, he suddenly smiled and raised his right hand, signaling the tens of thousands of cavalrymen under his command to line up and wait for orders. A deputy general frowned and asked, "Retreat?" Xian Zhilong shook his head and said with a smile, "How can the Tang Empire retreat alone in front of the whole world? But our men are also tired and need a break." Shooting arrows was a battle, but not shooting was also a battle. It also required more wisdom and accurate judgment of the situation. The Great River Kingdom's reaction and the Tang armies beginning to line up proved that Ning-Ke's judgment was not wrong. It was quiet in the wilderness. The West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army looked nervously to the north, trying to find Ning Quebec. Under the threat of such an iron bow, moving forward became an extremely terrifying thing. However, the northern wilderness was full of desolate men who were either injured or dead. Ning-Ke would be hard to find if he sneaked among them. So, the problem left for the coalition army was how many arrows did he have left? Or how to find this person, or how to force this person out. At this moment, a solemn and loud voice came from the huge, sacred sedan. It startled tens of thousands of gauze curtains and shone on the golden railings. It came to the front of the desolate man's army like thunder. "Today, I will send the first 2 chapters. I will go out for dinner and then come back to update the rest. The situation of the monthly votes is very serious. If you still have monthly votes, please vote for Jiangyi. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 671. Many things looked complicated and were also complicated to do. Only a few people had the ability to see the simple core of complicated things and then make a concise and correct response. The hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace naturally had this ability. He knew that it was not easy to find Ning Ke in the vast wilderness because human beings were not like goshawks that could fly in the sky and look down on the world, nor could they be like Hao Qian who could calmly and lovingly see all the details of the world from the ninth heaven. Since it was not easy to find Ning Ke, the easiest way was to let Ning Ke show himself. So he said a sentence to the lonely black horse carriage in the north. "Daughter of Yama, you finally showed up." The hierarch lord's voice was very bright, as if it was painted with gold and as broad as heaven and earth. After it came out from the giant's sedan and pavilion, it suddenly condensed and turned into a solid thunder. Wherever the thunder passed, tens of thousands of gauze curtains danced even though there was no wind. The golden railings beside the sedan shone brightly. Several priests spat out blood and fell to the ground dead. A straight, invisible airwave appeared in the wilderness, stirring up the bloody soil and countless grass and gravel, attacking the black horse carriage in the north. A figure swept out from the crowd of wilderness and came to Sang Sang as fast as he could. It was Ning Quebec. He took out the big black umbrella from behind and wanted to open it to block the thunderous sound wave for her. The sound wave was too strong. The wind howled and the thunder rumbled. Before the big black umbrella could be fully opened, Ning Ke was blown to the ground more than 100 feet away. His black academy uniform had many tiny tears, and his tough skin had many cuts, some of which began to bleed. The big black horse looked at the thunder, the sound wave, and the strong wind, and it kicked its hooves in fear. It wanted to turn around and escape, but it could not bear to run away. It bent its front hooves and buried its head in the ground, pretending that nothing had happened. The thunder came to Sang Sang. Sang Sang's face was slightly pale, but her eyes were unusually bright. She did not know how she could withstand the terrible thunder, but she vaguely knew that she should not be afraid of it. The dozen or so black crows circling above her head suddenly swooped down and let out extremely cold, shrill, and unpleasant caws towards the thunderous sound that carried dust and rocks. The black crow kept flapping its wings. Every time it flapped its wings, it would create two strong gusts of wind that carried the cold aura emitted from Sang Sang's body towards the south. Countless cold gusts of wind were generated from the bottom of the black crow's wings. They were like countless thin ropes that intertwined and weaved together, eventually turning into an extremely tough and thick rope. The sound of thunder and the cold wind met in front of Sang Sang. The cawing of the black crows became more and more shrill. From time to time, black feathers would fall off, float down, and stick to the ice around Sang Sang, looking like ink spots on white paper. The cold wind gradually subsided. The sound of thunder gradually dispersed. The smoke and dust gradually settled. The dozen or so black crows flew back to Sang Sang's head and circled around. However, their flying speed was much slower than before, and they seemed to be a little tired. Just like that, the Lord Sect Master's thunderous roar was scattered by a dozen black crows. Ning Ke climbed up from the ground and walked to Sang Sang's side. His expression was a little complicated, not because his whereabouts had been exposed, but because the encounter between the black crows and the thunderous roar had proved some of his conjectures. Since Sang Sang was the daughter of Yama, how could Yama watch his daughter die without doing anything? The people feared Sang Sang because the cold aura in Sang Sang's body could destroy the human world. Then why did the West Hill Divine Palace send such a large force? Because they were afraid? Why were they afraid? The powerhouses of the Buddhism and Taoism sects should be very clear that Sang Sang's strength was very ordinary. Especially after a serious illness, she became very weak and could be easily killed. Their fear could only mean that after Sang Sang woke up, she had the ability to make them afraid. That was why the hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace personally went to the wilderness. It was not hard to imagine that the daughter of Yama had some kind of terrifying ability. It was just that Sang Sang was not able to show it before she woke up. Until her illness became more and more serious, the cold aura in her body became more and more intense. As she woke up day by day, the unknown ability began to return to her body. Ning Ke had clearly realized this when he was in the Yueluan Kingdom, but he did not take advantage of it. Instead, he tried all ways to cure Song Song's illness. He wanted to destroy or suppress and purify the cold aura in her body. Even at the most dangerous moment, he did not want her to show that unknown ability. Just as Sang Sang once said, once Sang Sang really woke up, she would become the daughter of Yama. Would Sang Sang still be the Sang Sang now? Would she still be Sang Sang? You are indeed the daughter of Yama. The hierarch's voice sounded from the sacred sedan again, echoing uneasily in the wilderness. But this time, he sounded a little tired. It seemed that the thunderous roar had consumed a lot of his psyche power. Just as he finished speaking, the tall figure behind the tens of thousands of gauze curtains suddenly became even taller. Unknowingly, the divine staff that was even taller than the figure appeared in the hands of the figure. Looking at the changes behind the giant sedan curtains, Ning Kei's mood suddenly became cold. He did not know what would happen next, but he had a feeling that what was about to happen was very scary. The tens of thousands of gauze curtains on the giant sedan suddenly burned. It was not a real burning, but countless rays of light and heat flowed through the thin cracks of the curtains like flowing water. The tall figure behind the curtains also began to burn. Countless rays of light and heat spread out from the edges of the figure. The remaining green grass beside the sedan instantly turned yellow and then black. Dozens of red-robed priests and divine guard beside the giant sedan dragged the bodies of the priests and Luo Kadi away as fast as they could, avoiding the terrifying rays of light and heat. Then, they knelt down in front of the giant sedan. The light was the holy radiance, and the heat was the absolute heat. Countless rays of light and heat emerged from the hierarch's body. His figure seemed to have become lamp oil. He held the long divine staff in his hands, like the wick of an oil lamp. Light and heat were burning. The burning of the lamp oil was transmitted to the burning of the wick, and it became a specific flame. The flame was a pillar of light. A holy pillar of light emerged from the top of the divine staff, penetrating the top of the giant sedan and shining into the sky. The southern sky was not covered by dark clouds. It was blue and boundless, with a few white clouds floating above. When the pillar of light fell on the sky, the blue sky became bright in an instant. A few white clouds floating in the sky covered the light in the sky, and the edges seemed to be plated with a golden edge. Endless pressure descended from the sky and fell on the wilderness. There was only one color left in the blue sky and white clouds, or rather, there was no color at all. There was only light. Absolute light was a very monotonous visual perception. At this moment, the hundreds of thousands of people in the wilderness looked up at the bright sky, but they felt that they had seen an infinitely rich world. That world was not a real divine kingdom, but a spiritual perception. The infinite richness they saw was not a specific object, but a projection of countless human emotions under the power of Haoyan. The scene at this moment had already surpassed all the imagination of the world of cultivation and the imagination of cultivators of the highest state. This was no longer a divine skill, but more like a miracle. The hundreds of thousands of people of the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army knelt on the slightly cold ground of the wilderness and worshipped the bright sky. They worshipped the scene that only appeared in the mythological scriptures. The expressions on their faces were shock, awe, excitement, and fear. Then they all turned into absolute devotion and fanaticism. Previously, they had been frightened and panicked by the appearance of the daughter of Yama and Ning Kei's 5 arrows. But now, they had once again strengthened their faith and gained endless courage. Correspondingly, when the blue sky and white clouds turned into light, the mood of the desolate man's tribe was extremely low. The soldiers who were seriously injured and on the verge of death looked at the southern sky with despair on their faces. No one sang anymore. Even Tang's expression became a little bleak. Is this the legendary Tianqi? Ning Kei looked at the giant chariot under the light pillar and the tall figure in the chariot and asked, "No, Master's Tianqi was not like this back then." Sang Sang said and then coughed painfully. Much of the light from the southern sky fell on the vicinity of the desolate man's tribe. Naturally, it also fell on her. A few wisps of extremely faint white smoke came out of her black fur coat. It looked like her body was burning, but there was no smell of burning. She looked at the light in the southern sky with a timid look in her eyes. Ninkei looked at her tightly furrowed brows and felt a little sad. He reached out and wanted to hold her in his arms. But the moment his fingers touched her body, there was suddenly a piece of ice on his fingernails. An intense pain spread from his fingertips to his sense of perception. Ninkei groaned and found that in a moment his entire right hand was frozen and the ice was spreading to his arm. The cold aura in Song Song's body had completely awakened and was releasing it. Ninkei should let go at this moment, but he did not want to. The great spirit in his body quickly turned into Hao Ian's divine light and instantly melted the ice on his arm. Then he held Sang Sang in his arms. Song Song's hair flew across his face, and instantly there was a line of snow. His lips were covered with frost, and his voice was trembling and unclear. If it's too painful, don't do it. The light from the southern sky fell on Sang Sang, burning her body, heart, and soul. The cold aura in her body kept freezing her body, heart, and soul. This process was very painful. Ninkei hugged her tightly. The frost on his body was shattered and melted by the great spirit in his body, and then condensed again. He was also in pain, but he knew that she was in more pain. Song Song's body trembled violently, and she seemed to be in great pain. She curled up in Ninkei's arms to hide, just like in the past years, trying to find safety and warmth there. However, the light was everywhere, and she had nowhere to hide. The cold aura was in her body, and she could not hide. She could only continue to suffer between the heat and the bitter cold. One more chapter, to be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 672. Sang Sang cried out. Her tears slid down her dark face and fell on Ninkei's body. The black cloth suddenly hardened and fell on the ground, turning into ice beads. Each ice bead was crystal clear, round, and exactly the same size. A series of extremely fine, shattering sounds rang out from within her body. It was as if her bones were being crushed into countless fragments, or as if her flesh and blood were being decomposed. It was even more like a hard piece of ice being continuously compressed. The cold aura in her body was finally released completely. With her body as the center, a dark ball spread in all directions. Ninkei, who was holding her, was instantly hit and sent flying dozens of feet away. Wherever the aura reached, the field was frozen, the grass was covered with frost, and there was no sign of life at all. Ninkei fell heavily on the ground and spat out blood. The blood froze instantly, and it was not until the third mouthful of blood that it began to emit hot air. He was sent flying by the cold aura, but the big black umbrella remained where it was, right under Song Song's feet. Sang Sang squatted down, picked up the big black umbrella, and opened it. The cold aura continued to be released from her body to the wilderness. After the invisible aura met with the real nature, it turned into a cold black cyclone, rolling up the gravel on the ground and whirling around her body. It looked like a black cloud of dust. Since landing in the small courtyard in Chaoyang City of the Yueluan Kingdom, the black crows had been following Sang Sang, circling and dancing in the sky above her head. At this time, when Sang Sang changed, more than a dozen black crows seemed to sense something. They cawed and flew away, flapping their black wings to fly higher into the sky, as if they wanted to get as far away from her as possible. Finally, they all flew into the dark clouds. The cloud had been following Sang Sang for a longer time, and it had never left the western wilderness. It became thicker and thicker, and it became difficult for the light to penetrate and refract. Gradually, it became dark clouds, but the clouds themselves should be white. After flying into the clouds, the dozen black crows became small black spots, as if someone had dripped a few drops of thick ink into the water urn. The color of the clouds gradually became darker and darker. On the ground of the wilderness, the black smoke and dust were still swirling around Song Song's body. The chilly aura followed the big black umbrella in her hand, and rose high into the sky. If the divine scepter in the West Hill Divine Palace's hierarch's hand was the wick, turning the light and heat released by the divine skill into real burning flames and lighting up the southern sky, then the big black umbrella in Song Song's hand was like a writing brush dipped in the cold aura in her body and dyed the northern clouds black. The dozen or so black crows were just drops of ink before the brush was drawn. The real black came from Sang Sang herself. The dark clouds rolled violently, and then suddenly became still, calmly accepting the cold aura coming from the big black umbrella on the ground. It became darker and darker at a speed visible to the naked eye, more and more like a piece of paper covered with ink, until it finally became a solidified ink. There was nothing but black. What is black? Darkness means that there is no light. At this moment, the northern sky of the wilderness was completely dark. Apart from the lack of stars, it looked like night. The night will not appear in the day. There will be stars in the night sky. In that case, the starless night that appeared during the day was naturally not an ordinary night. Perhaps it would have another name. What's going on? Why is it dark over there? Is this the everlasting night? The people on the ground of the wilderness looked at the sky that was separated by light and darkness. They didn't exclaim or scream. They just muttered to themselves. The shock they received was so great that they had even forgotten the feelings of shock and fear. Their expressions were numb and confused, as if they had lost their souls. The West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army stood under the bright southern sky and looked at the night in the north. After a long time, the people finally woke up and began to exclaim, scream, and cry. Some people tried to escape, but all the war horses were frightened and collapsed on the ground. It was chaos. The desolate stood under the dark northern sky and looked at the light in the south. Everyone knelt down again and put their hands on their chests. They closed their eyes and prayed calmly and devoutly, waiting for the arrival of Yama. Ninkei struggled to get up and walk towards Sang Sang again. Before he decided to leave the desolate man's tribe and go south, he knew that something might happen to Sang Sang. It might even be something more terrible than death, because she would wake up and be seen by Yama. He did not care about the underworld invasion or the everlasting night. He only cared about Sang Sang now. Sang Sang was fine now. The rays of light from the bright southern sky could no longer fall on her body. Every time those strands of blazing light shone a few feet in front of her, they would be strangled by the dark, cold aura. And the cold aura in her body could no longer bring her any pain. Sang Sang was not well now. She looked at the south. Although it was very far away, she could now see clearly what was happening in the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army. She could even see all the details, including the expression on everyone's face. She saw that those people's faces were filled with fear, uneasiness, cowardice, hatred, sadness, and all sorts of negative emotions, but she did not see love on their faces. No one in the world would like her now. Sang Sang looked down at the tips of her shoes and the two blooming ice lotuses under her feet. She said in a low voice, "Before my teacher died, he kept looking at the north. Only now do I understand that what he saw at that time was me now. It turns out that at that time, he had already determined that I was the dark shadow." Ninkei walked behind her and reached out to hold her hand. Sang Sang stepped on the lotus made of ice and snow, her feet touching the ground. Her body seemed to be weightless at this time, just a transparent and intangible existence. Ninkei asked, "How do you feel now?" Sang Sang whispered, "I feel like I'm very strong." Ninkei asked, "Do you like it?" Sang Sang shook her head and said no. Ninkei said, "Bear with it." Sang Sang said, "I can't help it." Ninkei asked, "Why not?" Sang Sang looked up at the south and said, "Because no one will like me anymore." Ninkei said, "Be more promising. At least be sober." Sang Sang asked, "What do you mean by sober?" Ninkei said, "You are so ugly and bad-tempered. No one in the world likes you except me. Even if no one likes you now, as long as I still like you, there is no difference from before." Sang Sang thought about it and said, "That seems to make sense. Half light, half dark. Quite a few people have written about it before. The one that left the deepest impression on me was the part in the smoking man's blasphemy. It was extremely shocking. The part about the night will come was, of course, influenced by it, including the relationship between the great prophecy and the Buddha's words. However, the part about the night will come, in terms of its origin and meaning, is something completely different. It can even be said that, well, I can't spoil it. I can only say that I write sitcoms, okay? This chapter is only 2,000 words, and I'm really tired. I'll write a separate chapter and go to sleep. See you guys tomorrow, or a separate chapter later. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 673. Endless darkness and coldness poured into the sky from the big black umbrella and dyed the northern sky of the wilderness black, as if the night had come. Endless light and heat poured into the sky from the top of the scepter and dyed the southern sky of the wilderness bright, as if the divine kingdom had come to the human world. In the blood-colored chariot, Yi Hongyu looked at the sky that had been cut into two different halves. There was no expression on her beautiful face. Then she wiped the blood from her forehead and looked at Sang Sang in the north. Sang Sang was the daughter of Yama. Anything that happened to her could be imagined. Although Yi Hongyu was shocked, she did not pay much attention to it. Her eyes finally fell on the hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace a few miles to the east. Her brows slightly furrowed, because she could not clearly see whether that holy pillar of light came from the Lord Hierarch's body and fell into the sky, or whether it fell from the sky and landed on his body. In a meadow dozens of miles to the south of the wilderness, dozens of riders were looking at the northern sky. The silver mask reflected the strange and frightening sky. Light and darkness met in his eyes. The color of his eyes became darker and darker, and his emotions became extremely complicated. No one knew what he was thinking. Now he did not care about light or darkness. He was just jealous that the little girl holding the big black umbrella had attracted everyone's attention. Even Ning Ke had become the center of the world at this time. It should be me standing there, Prince Long Qing thought. Then he remembered that after he escaped from the Jisho Abbey 2 years ago, he thought that he was the son of Yama, so he became even more jealous. In Helan City, the Tang Emperor looked at the sky in silence. The arrival of the night indicated the invasion of the underworld, but did not make the most powerful monarch in the human world feel any fear. On the contrary, his eyes became clearer and clearer as the light and darkness in the sky shone, and he looked a little excited. Master Huangyang stood beside the emperor and bowed to the light and darkness in the sky with his palms pressed together. His lips moved slightly, but no one knew what he was saying. At the back of the mountain of the academy, the wisteria on the steep roof corridor was blooming. The walls of the small building were covered with green vines. There was no one in the dark cliff cave. Everyone was on the edge of the cliff. Eldest brother and all the younger brothers and sisters stood on the edge of the cliff and silently looked at the sky in the north that was divided by darkness and light. The magnificent Chang and city was shrouded in golden light. "We should be there now," second senior brother said. Eldest brother said, "Even if we are there, we can't do anything." Second brother said, "But at least we are there." Eldest brother said, "Teacher doesn't agree with us being there, so we can only watch from here." In the sword garret of South Jin Kingdom, it was quiet in the dark cave. Spring had dyed the forest behind the mountain green, but it had no effect on the cliff cave. The pond in front of the hut was still cold. The sword saint, Liu Bai, sat cross-legged beside the pond. He lowered his head and did not look at the sky. The opening at the top of the cliff cave was too small. Even if he looked up at the clouds, he would only see a patch of light. An ancient sword slowly rose from the bottom of the pond. Compared to this sword, the sword that Liu Bai often used on the straw hut was as broken as a straw. No one knew that the sword saint Liu Bai was hiding in the belly of the sword garret. He had been meditating by the pool for many years. Other than the fear in his heart that he did not dare to show himself, he had been cultivating a real sword. It must be the strongest sword in the world. The sky shrouded the earth and could be seen by everyone. Therefore, everyone in the world could see the sky that was separated by light and darkness. However, because of the perspective, the further south one looked, the more light they could see and the smaller the dark sky. At the extreme south, the dark sky above the wilderness became a smear of black on the ground. It looked like a flattened, dark passage. If that dark passage connected the underworld and the human world, then what would come out of that passage in the next moment? The army of the underworld or the body of Yama? In the depths of the South Sea, in the extreme south, tides rose and fell. Huge waves shook the reef, and underwater volcanoes spewed lava continuously, evaporating the seawater. White fog shrouded the island. On the black reef at the edge of the island stood a Taoist in indigo. He looked at the dark sky in the far north and raised his eyebrows slightly. He said, "The sunset sands will open in reverse tomorrow." After saying this, he was silent for a moment. Then he shook his head and said, "It's still not right. The Buddhism sect did not participate in the holy war in the wilderness." As Master Lotus said to Ning Ke, and the headmaster of the academy and many others later said, the final way of the Buddhism sect was to close their eyes, not see, and not speak. Because of the Buddha's last words, the monks of the Buddhism sect tried to kill the daughter of Yama and save the world from great terror. However, because of the essence of the Dharma passed down by the Buddha, when the daughter of Yama was not killed, the underworld invasion could not be stopped. The everlasting night was coming, and the human world was about to enter the Dharma ending age. The monks of the Buddhism sect stopped trying to do anything but hide and hide. In the depths of the western wilderness, the huge and deep giant sinkhole was surrounded by clouds and mist. Neither the holy light nor the dark shadows could penetrate the clouds and fall on people. Tens of thousands of dark-skinned believers and slaves knelt at the bottom of the giant sinkhole, kowtowing and praying to the huge mountain in the center of the giant sinkhole. Their faces were full of piety and fear. All the monks of the Xiankong temple had hidden in the yellow temples among the mountains. Faint chanting came from different temples, and then gradually flowed down like water, as if to cover the whole mountain. Master Chi Mei, the president of the Hall of Venerable, stood in front of an ancient bell outside a temple. When his left hand, which only had 2 fingers left, fell on the face of the bell, he tapped it from time to help the chanting to spread further. Looking at the distant sky in the east, watching the scene of the confrontation between light and darkness, he looked a little anxious. The perseverance and calmness of the past had disappeared. The Dharma ending age predicted by the Buddha was finally coming. However, too many celestial devices left by the Buddha had been lost. The cleansing bell was destroyed, and the chessboard was missing. Could the Xiankong temple still avoid the eyes of Yama? A calm and indifferent voice sounded in front of Chi Mei. When the dark night comes, all Dharma collapses. It is a great horror. However, Hao Ian overlooks the world and will never allow such a tragedy to happen. Now that the light has come, the dark night may not necessarily win. Disciples of the Buddha should pray sincerely. Chi Mei accepted the teaching seriously. His fingers left the face of the bell, and he sat cross-legged in front of the temple. He looked to the east, put his palms together, and prayed sincerely and quietly. Buddha is merciful, and the common people should be blessed by the Buddha. The sound of prayers gradually came from the countless yellow temples among the mountains. Gods and Buddhas bless us. Akalanatha bless us. Light, the chief preaching monk of the Xiankong temple, did not chant, nor did he pray. He held his staff and stood at the top of the mountain. He looked at the parallel wilderness, the distant light and darkness, and he looked extremely tired. The night gradually expanded and slowly invaded the south. Countless fine cracks appeared on the edge of the bright sky, like a spider web. Then the cracks were instantly poured into the darkness and turned black. When the darkness and the light met, there was no sound. But everyone on the ground of the wilderness felt their hearts beat faster, and then they felt an extreme pain. People looked at the bright sky being eroded by the darkness inch by inch. The pain in their hearts became more and more severe. They covered their chests, but they did not know whether the pain came from their bodies or their souls. The black cracks on the edge of the bright sky gradually became thicker, until finally the cracks became lines, and then pieces, and then they merged together. That was a new night. If this situation continued, the night would become stronger and the light would become weaker. After a moment or hundreds of years, the whole world would be covered by the dark night. The people living on this land and the beasts in the mountains would never be able to see the light again. Endless fear occupied the hearts of the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army. Even the people in the Desolate Man's tribe instinctively felt fear when they saw this shocking scene. In the pavilion of the Divine Chariot, the tall figure of the West Hill Divine Palace hierarch suddenly knelt down. His right hand was still tightly holding the divine staff. His calm but thunderous prayer sounded in the wilderness. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers of the West Hill Divine Palace knelt down and began to pray with the hierarch Lord. Even the Tang army knelt down because they were also believers of Hao Yin. They were also afraid of the coming of the everlasting night. Hundreds of thousands of people prayed in unison. At the beginning, their voices were a little messy. Then they gradually became more and more orderly, powerful, and shocking. People prayed for the miracle of Hao Yin, for the strength of the light, and for the darkness to recede. The sky in the south of the wilderness suddenly became brighter, as if countless amounts of light were injected into the firmament. The silent and slow night gradually stopped. A shrill crow's cry sounded in the night. The ink-like night began to roll and roll, as if there was a consciousness there that felt that it was being desecrated and began to become angry and violent. The snow lotus under Song Song's feet had already bloomed. She closed her eyes and tightly held the big black umbrella in her hand. The cold aura kept gushing out of her body, rolling up the aura of heaven and earth in the wilderness. It turned into a gloomy black color and kept pouring into the night. Ninkei stood not far from her and looked at her silently. The light and the darkness were fighting with the firmament as the battlefield. This kind of fight between light and darkness was actually the fight between existence and non-existence. It was far beyond the level of human beings and was not something he could influence. At this time, the cold aura in Song Song's body had all awakened. Even if a piece of snow fell on her, it would be shattered into the smallest structure. So he could not hold her hand anymore. His hand was bleeding. The drops of blood fell to the ground and made a crisp sound. He could do nothing at this time. It was meaningless to do anything, so he could only look at her quietly. Suddenly, he felt that everything he saw was a little familiar. He looked to the south and found that the battlefield in the wilderness was full of corpses. He looked to the sky, which was bright like a round of sun, and the night was sweeping away. Ninkei was sure that he had seen these scenes before. Reporting to everyone, I have some personal matters to deal with today, so I might only write this chapter. I'm sorry, I'll write 4 chapters tomorrow. The last chapter will really be the climax. I'm really looking forward to it, but I'm also really nervous because I'm not confident in my ability. I'm afraid that I won't be able to write the feeling that I should have. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 674. Where did I see you? Ninkei looked at the sky and the wilderness, at the boundary between light and darkness, and at the countless corpses lying on the ground. He remembered that it was a dream. A few years ago, when he was traveling from the city of Wei to Chong, and he had a discussion and study with Liu Qingchun about cultivation. It was also on that night that he had a dream. When he went to bed that night, he held Song Song's slightly cold feet. He did not know if it was because of this, but the beginning of the dream was very strange. He dreamed of sea, on which there were endless white flowers or lotus flowers. When the white flowers dispersed, there was green seawater, and deep under the sea was a thick world of blood. In the world of blood, there were countless sad and fearless faces without facial features. He was terrified in the dream, and then he came to the real world, the wilderness. There were countless corpses lying around him. They were the Tang cavalry, Yuelin warriors, South Jin kingdom crossbowmen, and many grassland barbarians. Blood flowed from the bodies of these soldiers, and the entire wilderness was dyed red. 3 black clouds of smoke floated steadily in front of the wilderness, looking at where he was standing indifferently, as if they were alive. Countless people in the wilderness looked up at the sky in horror. Ninkei followed them, and saw a scorching sun in the sky. The sunlight was dim, and it seemed that night was coming. A patch of darkness spread from the horizon. Sang Sang stood on the snow lotus, holding a black chess piece in her palm. She looked at the terrified West Hill Divine Palace Coalition army opposite her, and the cold aura continued to gush out from her body, as if it would never stop. The night sky gradually darkened, and the light in the south gradually dimmed. The spring wilderness became colder and colder, and the corpses lying in the pool of blood in the wilderness gradually froze. Looking at the increasingly familiar scene in front of him, Ninkei's body became a little cold. He was more and more sure that what he saw in the dream during the journey was what happened today, except for some minor differences. For example, in the dream, he did not see the corpses of the desolate men, but there was a scorching sun in that dream. Then Ninkei remembered that he had entered a dream between the last giant rock when he tried to climb the mountain on the second floor of the academy a few years ago. In that dream, he also came to the wilderness. Along with countless people, he looked up at the sky. Boundless darkness was approaching from the sky, and despair and fear were written on everyone's faces. In that dream, he said certain things to certain people. The scene in the dream had left a deep impression in Ning Kei's memory and made him inexplicably afraid. He did not even tell Sang Sang about it. He regarded it as his biggest secret and subconsciously did not want to remember it. Until today, those dark and gloomy dreams had become reality. Ning Kei looked at Sang Sang and the swirling black aura around her. His body trembled slightly. It was not until this moment that he realized that the signs in the dream were none other than Sang Sang. He had always been with Sang Sang in this life, so those dreams had always accompanied him. When he first had this dark dream in the carriage, he was hugging Song Song's feet to sleep. Now that he thought about it, that night was probably the first day Sang Sang woke up. In that dark dream, he had seen 3 streaks of black smoke. At this moment, Sang Sang should be one of them. Were the other 2 terrifying black smoke? Ninkei looked around and did not see any black smoke. He pondered for a long time until the night sky gradually forced the light in the south to retreat, but he still could not come up with an answer. Suddenly, he turned around and saw that the big black horse had bent its front hooves and was squatting in front of the black carriage like a dog. It looked up at the battle between light and darkness in the sky, looking very afraid. At this moment, Sang Sang stood in front of the desolate man's tribe, facing the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition army. She was very lonely. There were only him and the big black horse beside her. The cold black aura that spewed out from her body swept the grass and gravel on the ground of the wilderness, enveloping him and the big black horse. Ninkei's body stiffened slightly. He realized that the other 2 black smoke were himself and the black carriage. In that dream, he stood in the direction of the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition army and looked to the north. He saw 3 black clouds of dust. Now, in reality, he was standing in the north and was part of the 3 black clouds of dust. The 3 black smoke that brought fear and despair to the entire world was him. But in that dream, he was standing in the south. Why was he here in reality? When did he change sides from light to darkness? And when did he make the choice? When he was a child, when he waved the hatchet at the housekeeper in the woodshed, had he already made the choice? When he climbed the mountain on the second floor of the academy, he once again waved the knife in the illusion and killed the housekeeper and young master. Then, he walked towards the opposite darkness. Had he already made the choice? When he found out that Sang Sang was the daughter of Yama in the Lank Temple, he walked into the light of Buddha without hesitation and opened the big black umbrella. He fled in the wilderness and waved the knife at the innocent people in Chaoyang City. In the dream, he had made the choice. In reality, he had made the same choice. Ninkei remembered that this dark dream had happened once before. That was in Chang'an City. He had just learned cultivation and could feel the chi of heaven and earth in the world. He was so touched that his eyes were slightly wet, and then he had a good sleep with Sang Sang in his arms. Every time there was a big change in life, there would be a dream. In that sweet sleep, there was also a dark dream. In that dream, darkness gradually occupied the sky above the wilderness, and the pure night covered the sky. seeing that the eternal night was coming. And when the cold defeated the light and heat, there was a sudden thunder in the sky. The thunder rumbled and instantly spread throughout the entire world. Many people in the wilderness were struck by this thunder and fell to the ground, moaning in pain. Those who could still stand were like statues, looking up at the sky in a daze. At the place where the thunder sounded, the holy light instantly lit up the entire night sky. High up in the sky, in the brightest place in the center of the holy light adventure, a huge golden door slowly opened. One could vaguely see the head of a huge golden dragon slowly poking out. Yes, if the dream represented the reality that was going to happen, and it was a sign of the war between light and darkness, then the darkness that Sang Sang brought to the world would not be so easy to win. The light in the sky in the south had dimmed, and the huge and terrifying golden dragon head had not yet appeared. A great fear occupied Ning Kei's body and mind. He looked at the sky in shock and looked at the darkened sky in the south. He thought to himself, will I really see that scene later? The dark night came from the north, oppressing the light in the south and making it dimmer. It was eroding the kingdom of light inch by inch. The white clouds that had been swallowed by the light reappeared. The edge of the white clouds suddenly brightened, and it was even brighter than when the West Hill Divine Palace Hierarch's divine scepter emitted a beam of light. It did not seem to be gilded, and was completely burning. It looked like a scorching sun, hiding very close behind the white clouds. A thunder rumbled in the sky. There was a loud bang. The heavenly thunder fell on the wilderness, and the blood that had congealed in the soil was all shaken out. It bounced up to the height of one's knees, and then fell down, as if it was raining blood from heaven. The corpses of the desolate soldiers and the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition army that had fallen on the wilderness also leaped up, as if they had been resurrected for a moment, and then fell heavily to the ground, making horrible sounds of bones breaking and flesh breaking. Hundreds of thousands of people in the wilderness felt a sharp pain in their eardrums at the same time, and their knees went weak as they fell to the ground. More than 1,000 people who were closest to the center of the battlefield were directly shaken to death. This was the real sound of thunder, the sound of the heavenly thunder. Compared to the thunder that came from the sky, the whistling sounds of swords, arrows, crashing sounds, and screams from the bloody battle in the wilderness were all so weak. The wind and thunder that Yi Su had attracted with his wooden sword when he chased after Tang were like firecrackers for children in the face of the heavenly thunder. They were not worth mentioning at all, and were so laughable in comparison. In the eyes of heaven, everything in the world was so laughable. The thunder sounded in the sky, rising behind clouds. The white cloud became brighter and brighter. Not only the edge, but even the thick center seemed to be burning, radiating light and heat to the ground. People knelt on the ground of the wilderness and looked up in astonishment. They could not see the real picture behind the clouds and did not know what had happened or what would happen. Only Ning Kei vaguely understood what was happening behind the clouds. He had a dream, and these things had appeared in that dark dream. The sound of thunder was the sound of the door opening. At this time, an extremely heavy and huge golden door was slowly opening behind the clouds. Behind the golden door was Hao Ian's divine kingdom of light. Ning Kei felt cold all over, and then he began to tremble like an ice sculpture, constantly shaking off ice chips. His body and soul were occupied by endless fear. In this wilderness, only he knew what was going to happen, and only he knew the truth. That was why he was lonely, and then more afraid, until he fell into despair. He looked at Sang Sang and shouted desperately, but his voice could not be heard in the increasingly bright light. Sang Sang still did not hear him. He ran to the black horse carriage as fast as he could, pulled the big black horse, and drove to Sang Sang, trying to escape with Sang Sang. However, at this moment, the white cloud in the southern sky suddenly darkened. It was not the white cloud that darkened, but something appeared from behind the clouds, and suddenly suppressed all the light in the wilderness because that thing was extremely bright. A huge golden dragon had peeked out from the clouds, looking down at the wilderness indifferently. Chapter 1. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Achidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 675. The golden dragon's head was huge. It was high up in the sky, but it seemed to appear in front of everyone. All the details could be seen clearly. The scales were like mirrors, and the dragon horns were like volcanoes. It had a specific shape, but it was hard to describe. It was pure gold, but also transparent. It gave off endless light and heat, sprinkling on the ground of the wilderness. With the appearance of the golden dragon's head, the southern sky suddenly lit up and returned to its previous state. Then, in an instant, it was tens of thousands of times more light and heat than the West Hill Divine Palace Hierarch's divine scepter. The dark night in the northern sky seemed to feel the power of the new light and suddenly became stagnant. The golden dragon's head slowly turned, and its two bright eyes swept over the humans on the wasteland with an ancient sense of stillness. Its expression was indifferent as it released a terrifying pressure. There were records about dragons in the West Hill Divine Palace's teachings, stories about dragons in the Buddhist scriptures, and legends about dragons in the human world. However, no one had ever seen a dragon with their own eyes, let alone a giant golden dragon. Such a mythical creature had actually come to the human world. The humans on the wilderness went crazy, especially the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army. Seeing that darkness was about to defeat light and that Yama was about to appear, they suddenly saw the giant golden dragon that represented light. They were so excited that tears streamed down their cheeks. They knelt on the ground and kowtowed. More people looked at the sky in a daze, as if they had lost their minds. The golden dragon's head released infinite light. Light represented warmth and love. However, light sometimes meant punishment when people dared to look directly at the light. In the next moment, the humans on the wilderness cried out in pain. They covered their eyes and knelt on the ground, no longer daring to look at the sky. However, the light from the golden dragon's head was so tempting that some devout believers of Haotian fearlessly looked in that direction with tears streaming down their cheeks. Under the endless light, the tears on the believers' faces evaporated instantly. The liquid in their eyes also evaporated, turning into two wisps of green smoke and disappearing without a trace. They became blind just like that. Because of those dreams, Ninkei had foreseen the appearance of the golden dragon's head. That was why he did not look up at the sky. He tore off the cloth and wrapped the big black horse's eyes. He pulled the black carriage to Song Song's side. Song Song's eyes were tightly shut and her face was abnormally pale. The black smoke around her was being purified at a speed visible to the naked eye under the illumination of the golden dragon head. Her body trembled violently in the cold aura that was gradually fading away. She seemed to be in extreme pain. The desolate men once again fell into despair and endless fear. How could they, the people of the mortal world, resist the divine punishment from Haotian? The desolate fell into despair and endless fear again. How could they resist? Tang did not look directly at the sky. The light and pressure emitted by the huge golden dragon head was not a power that could be resisted by the mortal world. However, he did not kneel because he was the last world wayfarer of the devil's doctrine. He represented the spirit of the devil's doctrine, and what the devil's doctrine wanted to resist was Haotian's rule over the world. There were also a few leaders of the desolate who cultivated in the devil's doctrine's techniques. They forced themselves to stand up despite their serious injuries and looked straight at the wilderness that was shrouded in light. They tottered, but refused to kneel down. The light from the sky grew brighter and heavier. The bodies of Tang and the leaders of the desolate warriors cracked. It was the desolate's hard bones fighting against Haotian's power. Sensing that there was actually an insignificant human in the wasteland who dared to defy its majesty, the golden dragon's head in the sky slowly turned and indifferently looked in that direction, letting out a dragon roar. The dragon's roar was low and deep, and when it landed on the wasteland, it was like a hurricane. In the wind, there seemed to be countless priests praying, countless knights roaring, and countless lights appearing. The grass on the wilderness that was drenched by the blood instantly turned black. The blood instantly evaporated into a fishy smell of steam. The few desolate man-leaders groaned in pain and fell down one after another. There was a crisp sound. Tang's left thigh bone was broken. He let out an angry and unwilling roar and fell backward. Even though he spat out blood, he did not kneel. The golden dragon came from Hao Ian's divine kingdom. It represented Hao Ian's power and released Hao Ian's will to the mortal world. It was a miracle and a punishment. The power of its roar was irresistible. Hundreds of thousands of people in the wilderness knelt down to show their respect and submission. In the West Hill Divine Palace, through the countless curtains, the tall figure in the giant chariot could be seen to have knelt down. The hierarch lord's hand that was holding the divine staff was trembling. No one knew if it was because of fear or something else. In another divine chariot, the great divine priest of revelation had also knelt down. He looked very calm. The deep wrinkles on his face reflected the light coming through the curtains. It was as if he was smeared with gold powder. In the blood-colored divine chariot, the great divine priest of judgment, Yi Hong Yu, also knelt down to show her respect to the golden dragon's head in the sky. She had maintained this posture since the moment the golden dragon's head descended to the mortal world. Only she knew that her knees had never touched the ground. It was not until the golden dragon let out that roar and Hao Ian's power swept across the wilderness that her knees were forced to touch the ground. Tang and several leaders of the desolate spat out blood and fell to the ground. Her face suddenly turned pale. Blood seeped from her knees and the corner of her lips. The golden dragon's head scattered infinite light onto the surface of the wilderness. In a short period of time, it purified the dark aura around Sang Sang. The rays of light that contained absolute light and heat fell directly on Sang Sang's body. Countless wisps of green smoke came out of her body. In the light, Sang Sang appeared to be in extreme pain. She held her chest and coughed nonstop. What she coughed out was not blood, nor was it a cold aura. Instead, it was something black and transparent like ice. The black, transparent ice was coughed out from her lips and fell on the ground of the wilderness. It made a heavy impact and created a deep pit before disappearing. At this moment, the dragon's roar from the golden dragon's head had also reached her. The black ice was completely crushed into the tiniest gravel. Her body suddenly twisted as if it was about to break. Ning Ke had already pushed his speed to the maximum. However, it was impossible for him to be faster than the speed of light and the speed of the dragon's roar. Just as his fingers touched Sang Sang's body, Hao Ian's power spread to his body. With a thud, he knelt on the ground beside Sang Sang. His knees hit the ground hard and seemed to shatter instantly. The intense pain was clearly transmitted to his sense of perception. It caused his face to turn pale, and he was abnormally terrified. No one in the world could resist the roar of the golden dragon. In front of Hao Ian, he was already so weak. In that case, what was the meaning of the choices he had made all these years? The battle between light and darkness was about to end. Sang Sang was about to die. What could he do? What could he change? If he could not change anything, then why did he have those dreams? Why could he see the future and the present in his dreams? Ning Ke put his hands on the ground and used all his strength to squat up. Then he stomped his feet back and changed from a kneeling position to a sitting position. He stood up under the pressure of the light, his expression extremely painful. Such a simple action almost squeezed out all his courage and strength. He reached out his trembling hands and took out a pair of glasses made of black crystal. He put it on the bridge of his nose. His face was abnormally pale. After putting on the sunglasses, it became even paler. The sunglasses corresponded to the darkness. The world in his eyes also became very dark. The blood and corpses in the wilderness had already occupied most of the light and heat in the sky. At this moment, in his eyes, it became much dimmer and colder. It was even more similar to what he had seen in his dark dreams. Ning Ke raised his head and looked directly at the golden dragon's head in the sky. The huge golden dragon's head almost occupied his entire field of vision, so it was very easy to aim. Although he had sunglasses on, the light still pierced his eyes and made them unbearably painful. Unknowingly, tears flowed down his face. The iron bow was slowly pulled, making a creaking sound. The dark iron arrow trembled slightly on the string. The sharp arrowhead faced the light from the sky and seemed a little dim, as if it was afraid. There was no fear on Ning Kei's face, only determination. He looked at the golden dragon's head in the black glasses and roared. He loosened the string and released the arrow, aiming directly at the golden dragon's right eye. The mythical creature represented Hao Yin and descended to the human world. The people living in the human world either knelt on the ground to show their reverence, surrender, or remained silent like a stone. However, no one would ever think of killing it, because it was impossible, but Ning Kei did it. The white turbulence had just blossomed behind the bowstring when it was purified into nothingness by the infinite light that descended from the sky. However, the iron arrow had already left the bowstring. In a split second, it had already reached a very high place in the sky. At this moment, everyone in the wilderness was kneeling on the ground. No one dared to look directly at the sky or the golden dragon's head in the sky. So no one saw this scene that had rarely happened in thousands of years. The golden dragon's head was extremely high up in the sky. In the human world, other than Liu Bai's sword, probably only Ning Kei's primordial 13 arrows could touch its territory. The dark iron arrow turned into an extremely thin black shadow in the thousands of rays of light. It accurately hit the golden dragon's left eye and was instantly purified by the light. If the giant golden dragon's eyes were like a calm lake, then the primordial 13 arrows, which made the cultivation world tremble, were like a thin piece of ice thrown into a lake. They disappeared instantly and did not cause any ripples at all. Ning Kei was not surprised by the result of this arrow. However, the word despair did not exist in his dictionary. He would not give up until the very end. Since he was going to die, he would not be satisfied if he did not shoot this arrow. The giant golden dragon looked down at the ground of the wilderness and at Ning Kei, who was holding the bow. A hint of mockery and contempt appeared in its huge lake of light eyes. Then it returned to absolute indifference and exhaled the dragon's breath. The dragon's head exhaled, and the golden light condensed into billions of grains of sand that fell on the wilderness like a river of sand. However, every grain of sand was absolutely transparent and contained infinite power. Chapter 2. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 676. As the dragon's breath descended, a holy, pure, and majestic aura reverberated across the wilderness. The bowstring in Ning Kei's hand snapped. With this sound, his sense of perception was in chaos. The ocean of chi and mountain of snow in his body seemed to show signs of collapsing. What was more frightening was that the drop of liquid formed by the great spirit in his lower abdomen seemed to have sensed the call of the dragon's breath. It spun violently and released countless threads of air that poured into every part of his body. If that was all, it would not be a big deal. The problem was that the great spirit that poured into every part of his body showed signs of penetrating through his skin and leaving his body. In the sky, the golden dragon's head slowly moved forward, and its slender body finally poked out of the burning white cloud. Its scales were as fine as brocade and as bright as mirrors, and they rubbed against the clouds and the air, producing golden sparks. As the giant golden dragon gradually revealed its full form, the pressure that enveloped the entire wilderness became heavier and more terrifying. Even the space of the wilderness itself began to become unstable. The dragon's breath that fell on the wilderness was formed by tens of thousands of tiny golden gravel. Strangely, these golden gravel, which contained infinite pressure, did not ignite into a blazing divine light after falling on the ground. Instead, they danced in the wind like real sand. Just because it did not burn did not mean that it did not have any power. The golden sand-like dragon's breath fell on the wilderness and landed on the corpses of countless desolate man-soldiers. Suddenly, many tiny cracks appeared on the corpses of the desolate man-soldiers that had been sleeping for a long time. Dozens of golden sand grains of dragon's breath landed on Tang's body. His animal skin clothes instantly tore apart, and dozens of tiny bloody holes appeared on his rock-hard body. Ninkei's situation was not much better. He waved his hand in an attempt to drive away the floating sand grains of dragon's breath. Unexpectedly, the golden sand grains did not have any force and stuck to the edge of his palm. An extremely thin, bloody hole suddenly appeared on the edge of his palm. The majestic, great spirit in his body dispersed out of his body through the bloody hole and instantly disappeared into the air. Ninkei understood what was going on. He cultivated in the great spirit and had long become a demon. Tang and the desolate man also cultivated in the devil's doctrine. They had their own worlds in their bodies and stored a lot of qi of heaven and earth. According to Haotian Taoism, the reason why the devil's doctrine was called the devil's doctrine was not only because the demonic cultivators created their own world, which was a great disrespect to Haotian. The most fundamental reason was that the demonic cultivators would constantly absorb the qi of heaven and earth from nature. If this situation continued, the qi of heaven and earth would eventually dry up. The giant golden dragon represented the will of Haotian. In its eyes, Ninkei and the desolate man were like shameless thieves who had stolen Haotian's wealth. Of course, it had to take back the wealth from these thieves. The dragon's breath, which was like golden sand, floated in the wilderness and fell on Ninkei and the others. It wanted to take away the qi of heaven and earth in their bodies and purify it into the original light of the world. This process was the divine punishment of Haotian. This was the so-called redemption. In the distant Healan city, His Majesty looked at the shining sky and the golden dragon's head. He was silent, and his expression was very solemn. The golden dragon's head spewed dragon's breath toward the ground of the wilderness. It was like a golden sand falling like a rainstorm. Looking at this picture, His Majesty's face suddenly turned pale, and he seemed to be in extreme pain. Master Huang Yang's expression was very serious. His right wrist reached out from his sleeve and held His Majesty's left hand. A string of sandalwood prayer beads slid across his wrist like flowing water and was put on His Majesty's wrist. When the prayer beads were put on His Majesty's wrist, a merciful Buddhist aura was born. His Majesty felt that the aura in his body that had been tormenting him for many years had calmed down a little. However, Master Huang Yang could not rest assured. He did not dare to let His Majesty's temper go. He let His Majesty stand on the city tower to watch the battle and forcibly helped him into the thick stone city tower. In the innermost room of the stone city tower, the Empress was holding the young prince. Her face was very pale, and there were still traces of blood at the corner of her mouth. The young prince cried and said to the emperor, "Father, please take a look at mother. What happened?" The empress looked at the emperor with a gentle smile and shook her head, indicating that she was fine. The emperor walked to her, took off the prayer beads on his left wrist without hesitation, and put them on her wrist. Master Huang Yang looked at this scene and sighed in his heart. Deep in the wilderness of the far west, all the monks of Xiankong Temple had taken refuge in the yellow temples of various sizes. The whole mountain was shrouded in clouds and mist. Only the faint sound of scriptures could be heard, but the specific scene could not be seen. Only a small part of the highest peak of the giant mountain could see the scene in the distance above the clouds and mist. The sky in the east was getting brighter and brighter. The chief monk of scripture of Xiankong Temple was holding a silver staff and looking to the east. His eyes had long been dried up by the light. No moisture could be found in his eyes, but he was not hurt. The light in the east was getting brighter, and the dark night was illuminated. Even though it did not disappear, it had been completely covered. There was no joy on the face of the chief monk, only fatigue and solemnity. Haotian descended, and the giant golden dragon appeared. The light shone on the world. Except for a few people, no one in the world could look up at the sky. Light was not only warmth, but also majesty. It did not need intimacy, but reverence. Therefore, light allowed humans to know of its existence, but not to see it. In the sacred sedan on the wilderness, Yi Hongyu tried to look up at the giant golden dragon in the sky. She instantly burst into tears, and the divine starlight at the bottom of her eyes dissipated. She had to lower her head expressionlessly again. Not being able to look up at the sky did not mean that she could not know about the divine war in the sky. Countless cities, towns, mountains, rivers, villages, and people knelt under the light. They looked at the projection on the ground and nervously watched the trend of the war between light and darkness. Countless believers of Hao Ian gathered in the nearest Taoist temple and kept chanting and praying. They blessed the allied forces on the wilderness and showed their piety to Hao Ian. They were crazy with joy and sorrow. As the light gradually overwhelmed the darkness, the people's happy cries rose to the sky. Many people fainted from the excitement, and some never woke up again. They returned to the divine kingdom of Hao Ian. In the deep mountains of West Hill, there was a very simple Taoist temple. This Taoist temple was probably the least known by Hao Ian believers, but it was the most important Taoist temple in Hao Ian Taoism. Behind this Taoist temple, there was a red mountain covered with green vines. There were countless deep caves on the mountain, and many powerful Hao Ian Taoism cultivators lived in these caves. Those powerful auras seeped out from the green mountains and watched the changes in the sky. They enjoyed the light from the giant golden dragon and gradually became restless. Occasionally, a low and happy laughter could be heard. The dragon's breath was the dragon's breath. After the exhale, it was inhalation. The huge golden dragon head high up in the sky opened its mouth, and its body suddenly thickened. A huge gust of wind suddenly blew up on the ground of the wilderness, whistling and spiraling, sweeping up the golden sand grains that were scattered on the ground. Looking from afar, there seemed to be a whirlwind between heaven and earth. The thin end was at the golden dragon's head, and the thick end was on the ground. It kept sweeping, and wherever it passed, sand and stones flew. As the golden sand left the ground, the aura of heaven and earth and the corpses of the desolate warriors on the ground was also sucked away by the tornado. The process could not be seen with the naked eye, but Ninkei could feel it because a lot of the great spirit in his body was sucked away by the giant golden dragon. At this moment, when he looked up again, the golden dragon's head and the sunglasses no longer had a sense of majesty and light. It looked bloody, terrifying, and greedy. The dark night in the north had slowly receded, and the big black umbrella no longer breathed out. Song Song's connection with the night had been cut off, and the aura around her had long been purified. Dust and gravel kept dancing in the air. Song Song's feet left the ground, left the white lotus-like ice, and floated into the air. The giant golden dragon looked at her indifferently. Song Song's clothes fluttered in the whirlwind. Sang Sang flew into the sky, towards the giant golden dragon's mouth. Sang Sang turned back and looked at Ning Quebec. Her eyes were terrified, and her expression was helpless. Ning Kei jumped up and hugged her legs, trying to pull her back to the ground. But he could not do it. Sang Sang was still flying up into the sky, taking him with her. Hao Ian wanted Sang Sang. Hao Ian did not want him. That was why Song Song's body was very light, but his body suddenly became as heavy as a mountain. With two cracking sounds, his arms that were holding Sang Sang were completely broken. But he still did not let go. Since he had grabbed hold of her, he would never let go. Even if his arms were broken, he would not let go. Even if he died, he would not let go. An extremely faint golden light swept past his eyelashes. The earth seemed to no longer have any attraction. Ning Kei carried Sang Sang and flew into the sky, following the dragon's breath, towards the giant golden dragon's mouth. Their hair and clothes fluttered in the air, looking like two black flowers. Under the pressure of the light, he started to bleed nonstop. Blood dripped from the black petals and fell on the wasteland. On the ground of the wilderness, the big black horse dragged the carriage and ran desperately. It seemed to have forgotten its fear and chased after the two people in the sky, neighing angrily and sorrowfully from time to time. Ning Kei looked at it and said in a hoarse voice, "What an idiot." Then he looked up and saw that the sky above him was full of light. There was nothing but light. It seemed so pure as death. So he knew that death was coming. He had made many choices in his life. Now it seemed that those choices were really meaningless. Just like at the last moment, he chose to jump into the sky and hug Sang Sang. But sometimes, the choice itself was very meaningful. He looked at Sang Sang and smiled. Sang Sang looked at him and smiled. At this moment, their figures suddenly stopped, no longer flying towards the sky, towards the light, because a hand reached out to the sky and grabbed Ning Kei's leg. This is the third chapter. The fourth chapter will definitely be updated after dinner. See you then. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.